are looking at the old program, which is different from this program. So they maybe go into one of those other rooms.
Yeah, the room says main auditorium instead of lecture.
Yeah. So that's probably why we're running a little bit late. Okay. Anyway, now this is
I don't know where everybody else is.
I think it's Sunday and people are just running late.
Okay. We're gonna surprise one of the sessions. It's 5,000. It was like buried between the 25s. So, but it's gonna be a random session today.
Check.
All right, I guess we'll just wait a few minutes and Ramon went to get everybody from the breakfast lounge.
So I'm thinking of finding 4 or 5 questions going back to our epic at the hospital.
Yeah.
Getting some of my colleagues together, like from pharmacy and respiratory therapy, and say, okay, what can we look at retrospectively? And specifically for IJM, what can we, are there 2 or 3 papers that we can knock out in short order that are respectable?
I was just talking about Stan, in our hospital, rib fractures. You know, everybody in the ED ought to get pain control, which they should be getting anyhow, and an incentive spirometer. If they're above 1,200, 1,500, my easily discharged, no matter what it's broken. You know, because if they have pain control, then they can take it.
Even with pain meds. And I've seen, like, especially older patients, they may not have as much pain up front, but they usually come in like on day 5 and they either have a pneumonia or like a really bad atelectasis. So I think it's perfectly fine to send them home if they need additional criteria, but I don't know what those criteria are.
I mean, it'd be a fast 1-month prospective study. And just to document, maybe by age. Maybe incentive spirometer on discharge from the ED doesn't really help you predict bounce back if they're over 60 or over 70 or something. Maybe the young person it does, you know. But rib fractures are so common. I mean, I think you could get a bunch of patients within a couple of months. Just be a prospective observational study of pain control and incentive spirometry, and
I've seen
which ones are successful.
I've seen one paper from Harvard looking at where the rib fracture is on the CT. So they found that if it's like in the most mobile of areas, then it tends to have a slightly worse outcome. If it's in the back, where it's, you know, like right next to the spine, it may not matter at all. They may just have back pain. So I think that also determines the prognosis.
It's one thing I haven't done for a while, to sit down and generate thoughts about, if I had a database, what questions could I ask? For instance, I'll tell you right now, Scott has got 2 databases, one with 55,000, one with 85,000 patients, which one's from MGH, one's EICU. The question is, if you have all these diagnoses and vital signs in somebody, what question can we ask?
Right.
I mean, we were doing work with glucose, but I guess I have to.
Welcome. This is our question and open mic session.
Yeah.
Which we're waiting for more people.
What?
In which we're waiting for more people. So Hallie's a MD PhD student from the University of Toledo, and she works in the immunology department.
Yes.
And
you have a paper.
Yes.
Yes.
I study sepsis.
Yeah.
Nice.
We had a paper published last April in Shock.
Nice, good job.
That, and we have another one outstanding on differences between viral, bacterial, and fungal sepsis. And that's under review of
Microbiology insights.
Yeah, good.
And ultimately, we're trying to look at the role of microRNA in down-regulating anti-inflammatory proteins and see if we can reverse that process.
So, anti-inflammatory.
Yes.
So if you downregulate anti-inflammatory, what response do you get on the other end?
You get excessive inflammation, such as in a septic response.
Mm-hmm.
There have been some studies looking into the role of a couple of different microRNAs when they bind to
Mm-hmm.
anti-inflammatory proteins that stop the MAP kinase cascade.
Mm-hmm.
But they're pretty thin on the ground, and they've only been in the last 10 years, so we think there's a good niche.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That's interesting.
And our research has actually shown that, or in our preliminary data, we've seen that microRNA has previously only been proposed as a sepsis biomarker,
Mm-hmm.
seems to actually have a greater role, even in cellular sepsis stimulation, than the ones the literature likes to talk about.
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
I'm going for an I-30 with that.
Yeah, that's if you get that, you're on your way to success.
Thanks. I tried. Dr. Papadimos is a fantastic mentor.
She's smart.
Good mentor.
I just tagged along. I'm
Smart.
She's actually the person who runs her lab is on the white cells section at
NIH.
NIH.
Yeah.
Kevin Pond. He just became chair of immunology and medical micro. But funding's a problem. And the only place we can find funding these days is from I can find it's from the military. And if it wasn't for Scott and his connections to defense contractors, our advantage is that we're near Dayton with the United States Air Force has their main research center there, and now the Navy's going there. So there are advantages to trying to get that to get money from those folks. So we're hoping to pull that off. There's a guy named what's Wink's name? I can't remember Wink's last name. Anyway, he's head of shelling out money for the United States Air Force, and he's in Dayton. And when people left our simulation center, he kind of cut us off because he thought it was empty. Now we've spent 2 years fostering a relationship, and we're at a point where we might start getting some of our money back. But we're working on we're working on a confined space project where we're taking people who are stuck in aircraft wings or in tubing on naval ships and monitoring their vital signs. But that's it's a prolonged process. But we bring them to the simulation center. We're taking males of different sizes, usually guys, some females, but slightly obese, slightly old, hypertensive. Laying them down for a long period of time, getting their vital signs, standing them up for a while, and sitting them down and seeing what their vital signs are like, and seeing what we can
Morning, Ramon. Yeah. Morning. So I found quality projects to be, increasingly more viable as a source of not only original publications, but also kind of projects that can attract funding.
Well, all fellows should have a quality project. So the question is, over the next 10 months for IGEM, how many can we put a couple quality projects?
Well, quality projects are original papers.
Yeah, no, right.
So
right.
I converted one of our quality projects, and I'm about to publish it into original paper, and it's about implementing oximetry-based telemetry or monitoring,
Right.
not really telemetry, and reducing telemetry at the same time. Because there's really very few indications for telemetry, no one really knows, and it never gets discontinued, so it generates extra work and extra expense. And that seems to have resulted in a lot of
Is there any place where I could
saves. Yeah.
Okay. Is there any possibility of, because I'm thinking of dry jam. So we do these polypharmacy papers.
Yeah.
Is there any place for me to do copy one of your protocols at Pluto House, which is we got almost 2 years worth of epic,
Yeah.
and see if I can duplicate the study.
Yeah.
If I found what you found independently.
Yeah, you can certainly do that. We want people to do that. There are at least 3 studies that have shown that it correlates with mortality, discharge to facility, things like that. There's one study that actually, and I think there's some methodological issue that doesn't show anything except I think the regression was done incorrectly, so it shows protective effect of polypharmacy, which doesn't make any sense. So, yeah. Yeah, that's no problem. But I think we have a large enough group. I think there's some people trickling in, so we can start the session. Good morning. All right, so I think we're gonna have people trickling in, and then if I may ask, whoever's willing to come up and sit a little bit closer, because this is gonna be more of a pass the mic. And I have the honor of having 2 of some of the most innovative folks here with me, Dr. Rich Sharp and Dr. Thomas Papadimos, who have tackled some of the problems that many international programs continue to struggle with, and that is not only how to go there, whatever it is, and contribute to the development of local capacity, but also how to get supplies, including things like an ambulance or simulation equipment, to those locations. So I would like to invite them to kind of maybe do some introductory comments each about this particular topic, and then have the audience ask questions about specific challenges and things that may be pertinent to their area of or sphere of influence, or rotations that they themselves are engaged in, or potentially future opportunities or experiences they may have heard from others. So maybe we'll start with Dr. Sharp, and I'll actually sit closer to the audience and pass the mic.
If any of you saw my presentation yesterday, one of the main milestones that I found is getting supplies and equipment to our partner facilities overseas, in my case Cameroon, can appear to be a very daunting task and very expensive one. And I found an easy solution. Once that partnership is made with that hospital, that institution, asking them how they get their supplies can really eliminate a lot of work and a lot of the barriers that you might see to getting supplies to that hospital. Oftentimes they'll have 1 or 2 nonprofit organizations already established in the United States that routinely sends them supplies or equipment, and contacting those organizations in the US and just piggybacking your supplies and your equipment with already planned and already paid for shipments is it was critical for me to get the stuff there that I need to get there. So just calling an international shipper and saying that you have 10 boxes of supplies to go to Cameroon, Africa, will cost you literally thousands of dollars, and that can be chopped down to $200 and almost no work on your part. So that would be my 2 cents to start any conversation. If anybody has any other thoughts, supplies and equipment, shipping, or other storage, or better ways of doing it.
How do you overcome issues with customs?
Yeah, these containers that are already arriving, yeah, low and middle income country governments, they're typically, and I don't want to generalize, but they're typically corrupt, but they're very stable. And these shipping ports, even the one that we go to in shipping port in Douala, Cameroon, there's a lot of taxes and there's a lot of fees that are really just, you know, just blackmail. You know, you know, and some of them come from the government. Some of them just come from the workers themselves at the shipping port. They'll just charge you money, they put it in their pocket, and they go home for the day. So these already established containers that come in, somehow they have the money either to pay those fees, taxes, whatever you want to call them, or they have people in those organizations that don't charge them. So that's another benefit to using that, because those taxes, fees, whatever you want to call them, are already being paid by somebody. But that's going to happen. The ambulance, unfortunately, had a large tax. It cost me only $5,000 to get it there, but they had a large tax to get it out of the shipping port to the hospital. And that's unfortunate. They knew about that. I asked them ahead of time, the hospital, do you really want me to send this ambulance? And they said yes, but we do know it's going to cost us a lot of money to get it out of the port. But it still is worth it to them. So some of those things you just can't avoid in these low middle income countries.
So I'll tell you a bit. So Jimmy there, his father, and I got involved in around before we got this current thing off the ground in 2008. This big catastrophe hit southern Europe, and in Greece. My parents were from Greece. Medical funding was for schools was cut by about 30%. Supplies to hospitals were cut by 50%. And this went on for a long time. The mortality rate went up. The spontaneous abortion rate in the country went up by 25%. HIV went up by 54%. Syphilis went up by 28%. And things weren't well. And I thought, well, is there something that we could do as a group of people that were with me in Ohio State and Toledo? And I wrote to all 7 medical schools in the country. So this was a real interesting experience. 6 of them didn't bother to send anything back, but one person sent a letter back, and it was almost like, okay, where's your father from? And you know, it was like a strange letter. And I responded to her, my father's from X. And she says, oh, I'm from X too. And so that's how the relationship began. And one thing I learned, and we talked about this yesterday, their faculty there, even though they're financially strapped, they all have about 100, 150 publications apiece. So they are sharp people. They know what they want. They know what they need. There's nothing I can offer them. They're a lot smarter than I am. However, we asked them, what could you use? And as we went through this relationship over the years, it turns out that they don't have much to do with medical simulation. And I happen to run a medical simulation center. And so what they've been trying to do over the last 4 or 5 years is find a facility if they could afford it, so the economy's gotten better. In the meantime, what we did is we offered through money we gathered, a 1-month mini fellowship in medical simulation. So we brought one of their faculty members to the United States, and we trained him in medical simulation, and we sent him back. We also brought in 4 Iraqi doctors and sent them back. And last month we brought, they have a lot of money, 28 Chinese doctors, and sent them back. But what happened eventually is they needed equipment, much like Rich's experience. And we went to Kinko's and we asked how much we had 20 simulation mannequins we could send, and they wanted $25,000. So the way, we couldn't afford that. So the way we decided to go about it was to be a bit crafty. We knew there was a large Greek population in Chicago. I speak Greek pretty well. My brother Steve kind of speaks it not quite as well as I do, but well enough. And so we contacted all the shippers that had Greek names. And we approached them in their native language, or we thought was their native language, and played on their sympathy. So what happened was we made a connection from Toledo to Detroit to Chicago, and we were able to get, for $1,500, ship 20 mannequins by truck to Chicago, and then by ship through Northern Europe down along the coast of Europe and to Greece. It took about 6 weeks to get them there, and the medical school met the ship and unloaded the mannequins. So there are you can either try to raise money, or you try to ethnically connect yourself, but knowing at all times that they know what they need, and you're really just a visitor, and you're just trying to help them with whatever their goals are.
Yeah, exploit any ethnic connections you have. For instance, in May, I had a family practice resident from Gambia who wanted to go back to Gambia. She had this trip all planned. We had, from AmeriCare's, $35,000 worth of medicines. And I said, okay, if we ship them to this port at Gambia, you're just a traveler from the United States. Well, she had family members in Gambia. One of them actually worked at the shipping port. So, I mean, connections like that, you just have to use. And it turned out great for this one particular trip. So, finding someone at your institution that might be from the host nation is critical. I mean, they can drive down to the port and get the stuff for you. So that's another way of avoiding those taxes, fees, blackmailing. Any other thoughts, questions? Yeah.
Go ahead.
The people who ran the perils of short-term medical missions talk yesterday actually brought up some very good points, like the equipment graveyards and the fact that a lot of places are not equipped to handle some of the high capacity and high energy sucking things that we think would be useful for them.
Exactly.
How do you avoid that?
Well, when that's part of the reason why I partner and I go there. So this past year, we had several ventilators from my hospital, nice, beautiful ventilators that they were just going to give me. I took a photograph of them. I emailed them to one of the surgeons in the hospital in Cameroon and said, can you guys use this vent? He said, absolutely not. They're just going to get here and sit here, because all the tubing is proprietary, the CO2 scrubbers. Said we just can't use them. So they can use those little portable ventilators I talked about yesterday, the real cheap portable ventilators. They can't use the big ones. So either you have to go yourself and know their personal limitations, or you have to contact someone there before you send any piece of equipment. Even Bovie machines, if it doesn't match that 3-prong plug that they use for a grounding pad, don't bother sending it, right? It's just going to sit there. So, I mean, even little things like that, you have to either know yourself because you go there, or you know someone there and you ask them. The graveyard thing is not new, and they were absolutely right. What they spoke yesterday is just sending equipment. Invariably, it's just junk. They get there, just sits there.
We have time for one more question, and then we'll have to wrap it up because it's already 9 o'clock. Went pretty quick. Anyone in the audience with any challenge you want to bring up, or any questions for the panelists?
I want to make a real quick comment. There are Fulbright scholarships that are 9 weeks long. And if you have any, for instance, I speak Greek fluently. I can kind of write it, but I don't know technical Greek. But there is a Fulbright scholarship where I can go and work with this medical school in Greece for 9 weeks, and they will teach me technical scientific Greek. That goes for Spanish and French and so on. So if anybody had time or had an inclination to visit countries, I'm sure that there are courses like that where you can learn the technical language of the country. If you have a basis in that language, a basis for that language.
All right, well, thank you. And to keep things moving on time, we'll hand it over to Bonnie. And Here are the mics.
The next speaker?
This is actually, Sue right here is the next speaker.
Okay, you're not
and
speaking?
And then, no, I'll just introduce her briefly, and then she'll speak, and then we'll do the panel.
The panel will be seated?
We'll probably be seated.
Okay.
So, I guess quick announcement while we're getting set up for the next session is that there's been a venue change for the next 2 hours of morning programming. And here in Lecture Hall 1, here in Main Auditorium, I think, we'll be having the more didactic lecture ethical framework for evaluating participation in international academic programs, followed by a panel discussion linked to that, to those themes on more broad ethical considerations in international academic initiatives, principles, best practices, and coping with challenges. So those 2 sessions, which were designed to be complementary, are going to be in this venue, and the content on injury prevention.
Oh no, I have no idea what I changed it to.
Medical crisis response will be moved over to the lecture hall 1. All right, so if you're in the wrong place, or that doesn't sound like a lot of fun, you won't be offended if you get up and leave. And hopefully on the other side, they'll also be sending people over. All right. And it looks like we're going to be into. Yeah, so I'll do that. So we feel like we're close. So I think, yeah, maybe I'll start with a little introduction. Myself, first and foremost, I'm Sari Savoyan, and I'm an associate professor of emergency medicine, a medical anthropologist, and a medical toxicologist with a faculty appointment at New York University, and I am the clinical coordinator for emergency medicine at the Qualitative Teaching Hospital, which is the National Hospital of Ghana, where I've been full-time in that role as the sole faculty in emergency medicine at the hospital for the past 7 years, as of October 1st. And it's my great pleasure to introduce Professor Susan B Tori, who has been a phenomenal mentor to me and a great help and support in trying to develop my own orientation and practical, yet also hopefully ethical analysis of what my work is and what I need to do moving forward. So Sue is a professor of pediatrics and
yeah, this is better because I can move around, right?
No, you're still going to need this one. This one is for the
recording?
Yes.
Oh, so I have to do both. Oh, okay.
And
is this one? Does this one work?
Are you going to be staying here at the podium?
I don't know.
So if you're going to walk around, you can hold this. This stay right here.
Okay. Oh, okay. And what do I do with this one?
You don't want to go. Yeah, that one you just hold at the top.
Oh, do I have to hold it all the time, or?
If you're moving around.
Okay, but from the stand here, I'm good.
I could leave
Okay,
it right here.
that's perfect. I'll try to remember.
do that.
Okay. I think I got it.
She's got it.
I
And
think she's got
ready.
it. And she, this is such a small audience that I'm going to try to
Yeah.
be a little
Bring
more
everybody
intimate.
forward and be more interactive. It
So-
looks like most of the people here are the panel anyway. So,
Oh, good, you guys come
so
critique
we'll
my
just
slides.
expand it and be a 3-person larger panel.
All right, right. Well, thank you,
over to
Sari,
you.
for.
Thank you for coming in over.
Oh, no, that introduction. I am Susan B. Tori. Susan P. Tori practices emergency medicine at Bay State Medical Center and does some international work as well. Who would ever have thought? I'm really excited to be here today to talk with you about ethics of educational global international medicine experiences. I have nothing to disclose. I think the objectives for our talk today, the overview, we're going to talk about some data and experiences that people have had in, I'm using the word global health because that's typically what the educational literature calls it. This conference, we're really talking about using the terminology international health medicine more. I'm not going to be able to do that. Just it's in full disclosure, I can't switch that way. And how generally how have ethical considerations really come about in global health generally? There are growing body of recommendations from various groups that we'll review. And I'm from Texas Children's. One of the many stops I've had along my long career, and we've had some interesting experiences in global health, and I'll just talk to you a little bit about that. In trying to keep this into a good educational format, these are things that you have to be able to do at the end of this talk. But let's just get into the meat of really the discussion. Who goes abroad, what's going on in medical education typically over the recent years. And these are data from Institute of Medicine and AAMC. And what you can really see is how the medical students more and more are going abroad as time has moved forward. In terms of resident postgraduate medical experiences globally, these are data from a systematic review that Vanessa Carey did and some others, and you can see that there's a fair number of programs, I think, see if I can do this, that actually have global health programs. These are the ACGME programs. About 20% of them actually have global health experiences. And what's interesting is that, not surprisingly, the bulk of these are really short-term electives. So thinking about and talking about short-term electives is we're going to really hit a large majority of the experiences. What you see on the world map is where these programs are actually participating for the most part. And it was interesting that they noted that these darker purple countries, Peru, Kenya, India, are the ones where the burden of disease is the greatest, so that we are actually having trainees go to places where there's a significant global burden of disease. It was really interesting to me to come across this really beautiful essay by a second-year internal medicine resident who chose to go abroad as part of as an elective in a highly structured relationship and program, she thought, within her medical school. She wasn't naive. She'd had experiences as a medical student unsupervised globally. And I'm just going to flash through some comments. In her pre-departure training, she was able to talk with some residents who had already been. Feelings that they expressed, things that they told her. They felt powerless. They felt overwhelmed. She got to Uganda, a senior clinician brought her onto the ward, introduced her to the team, and said essentially, "You're in charge." And that was it. She found herself supervising a resident and an intern and a really busy inpatient ward at Malago Hospital in Kampala. As she was really trying to get her feet on the ground and figure out what to do, she was really troubled by the idea that really what she was doing was participating in another form of medical tourism. So she went to the emergency department and she learned in the trenches some of the basic things that she needed to know. She's doing this all on her own. There's nobody who's really giving her direction. It's really not clear what her role is and what degree of supervision she has. But after a few weeks in casualty, she feels a little more grounded, is back on the wards, and then now is really having a much more peer relationship with these trainees and is completely overwhelmed by how dedicated they are. And at the end of the day says, well, I thought I was going to go there to do this, but in fact, this is what actually happened. And her recommendations coming back again in 2008 were really very much around roles and responsibilities and supervision. It's an interesting place to start this discussion. In a group that was working really on behalf of the American Board of Pediatrics did a lit review to kind of see, well, what are the areas, what kind of circumstances do learners find themselves in? And they're in a different country, and so, you know, language, culture, the logistics, their safety. There are a different healthcare system. How does stuff work here? What is the burden of disease? What are the kind of problems that this system can address? And then, of course, the different clinical context, all of which tend to overlap in the center with things like safety, ethics, culture shock, and adjustments, both in country and when you come home. Not a surprise, I think, to anybody sitting here today. In a qualitative study from a group of Canadians, a small sample size of 24 students, did a qualitative survey with them to see interviews of what were really the issues. Interestingly, 60% of them, this was published in 2014, 60% of them had pre-departure training, which sounds pretty good. 36% had post-experience debriefing. And if you can think back to your first experience going abroad, I imagine coming home is equally as traumatic as getting to the country that first time. And the themes that developed on a larger level were the resource disparities in provision of care, the clinical dilemmas that students found themselves in, and threats to their safety. And by safety, it's not just, you know, can I walk around at night? It's really what happens in the hospital when I'm drawing blood and there's a 30% prevalence of HIV. Or you can think of all the different situations that we should be handling here in the States, but particularly at a medical student level, may not be quite as aware of. And another group in, these were people from UCSF, these were faculty who had some experience, a fair amount of experience working abroad, and between what they knew from trainees and what they knew from their own experiences, they developed in a qualitative study some themes. And you'll see, you can't read this, but the themes are similar. I can't read it either. Scope of practice. I can't read it. And then the personal issues. Material shortages, dealing with moral distress, so incredibly similar themes to what the medical students experience. And just thinking for a moment about what it means as a postgraduate, and we'll talk about this later in the talk, there you have more clinical experience, and you're really actually in a tougher situation because there's an expectation that you can provide more service, which may or not be realistic. So let's get into a little bit of ethics. I am not a philosopher. I would consider myself an applied ethics person. So just looking at the big themes. Autonomy is freedom from coercion. Am I really going to be able to do, no one's forcing me to do this. Justice, are the benefits, the resources spread out evenly across the population. Beneficence, we're going to do good things. And non-malfeasance, we're not going to harm anybody. So these are pretty standard throughout, kind of ways we think about. In medicine, we think the most, I think, about the patient, in our context at the bedside with the patient. In research, of course, the protection of the subject. We understand that very well. Professionalism is really sort of our own ethical context for dealing with whatever the clinical scenario is. And I think for in talking about learners and global health ethics, for this talk today, probably population, how what we're doing with medical education really impacts the population that the learners are going to interact with. I don't want to say serve, because you'll see how I really feel about that by the end of this talk. We're not really serving anybody. So I think the areas we're talking about are professional and population, and then of course the community, which certainly comes into play. So these are all the ways that ethical principles in clinical medicine can be informed by ethics and ethical principles. If you look back in the global health literature, one of the first places that you see any discussion of this is with Ezekiel Manuel and his group, really trying to take what the principles for research that they developed for developed settings, high resource settings, and apply this to global health. And they came up with basically 8 principles that fall into 3 categories: partnership, collaborative. Remember, this is research, but you'll see how it kind of moves along the theme. Social value. This was particularly interesting to me. And again, it comes back over and over again as a way to really, as an important benchmark. And then minimizing exploitation, I took and really rolled in 6 principles that he talked about for doing good research and high quality research into the notion of minimizing exploitation. You're not going to, if you were going to try to get it through the IRB here and to say that it's really worth doing and not too harmful for a subject, this is going to be an important consideration. One of the things that was particularly, I thought, important about this proposal was the benchmarking. It's really great to have someone tell you what you ought to do, but benchmarks help you figure out if you're actually achieving that. And what we're doing often in global health is health sciences research, and that's really a little bit of a different ball game. And in this paper by Hyder and his colleagues, they talked about what was really different in health sciences research, and we can really figure that out. Really, now we're not talking about an individual, we're talking about a community, so we really need to be thinking about how this impacts an individual and their autonomy. Really may be a trade-off for the social value of whatever the health system strengthening thing is. So distributive justice becomes something to think about in a different way. And these guys weren't so sure that you could really take the pretty straightforward ethics of research that Ezekiel Emanuel set out and really apply it. But these colleagues, one of whom was an author on the first paper, said, no, we can do it, and did a very nice job of taking the manual ideas and really apply them to health science research. And this was just an example, as you'll see as we talk about this a little bit more. You should certainly come down and join this intimate group here when you feel like you're not right. That this, really there are so many similar themes throughout. The NGO community, and these folks were from the University of Washington and had a partnership that's doing primary care in West Africa and parts of Asia. And the NGO situation, as you can imagine, is really interacting much more with the health system. And so thinking about what the NGO is doing, perhaps in a parallel vein, is really impacting the health system. So the problem of internal brain drain. You've probably seen this. Your university is going to pay somebody more than the Ministry of Health is going to pay. And so you're taking resources out of the healthcare system, the healthcare infrastructure, to support your NGO. How can you really be developing programs that are lifting up and supporting the health system? And then this is where you see the community engagement piece start to come in more and more. If we're going to talk about a healthcare system, what does the community value? What are the cultural and economic and political variables that are going to affect how you interact? And so, again, the principles of scientific validity actually, I think, informed these decisions about effective implementation. And so finally, the educators got on board, in which this makes total sense. If you I didn't do this, but plotted activity in global health, starting with research, I'm a little embarrassed to say, HIV probably got a lot of people heavily funded and promoted in the United States. And then the NGOs tacking on, and then of course then the learners start. Finally the learners. And these weight guidelines, I think, they're a very diverse group of academics who developed them. And I think have become the, I don't say they're by no means a standard, but they're a measure of that almost everything in educational ethics and global health are compared to. And some of the principles that came out of this consensus were mutual and reciprocal benefit. Totally makes sense. Long-term partnerships with explicit agreements. We'll talk about this more. And this is the part of the trainee, the preparation, mentorship, supervision, safety. And then worthy of sponsorship, again, coming back to, scientific validity and doing things well. When I read these, and I've read them a few times, and I still have to always take notes about all the different things, I can't remember, but the things that struck me were, when we say mutual and reciprocal, what are we talking about really in training experiences? And my questions come out of my experience. How hard it is really to bring your partner from Ghana to New York. There are many, many barriers all along the way. And considering that we're very mindful of brain drain, and we're really looking for ways to do that in a responsible way. And then what is the idea of bidirectionality? And I would think, when I think about, I'm a relative newcomer to global health. I was once, my kids were old enough to leave alone with my husband. When they were in high school, probably, I started to do this. And so for the first few years, I was like, sort of, what's my own personal philosophy about this? How do I really think about it? And the one piece of literature that really helped me synthesize this was Nigel Crisp's book, Turning the World Upside Down. He is an ophthalmologist, and he ran the NHS in Britain for about 5 years, and has been a very, very active person in global health. And basically what he's talking about here is that, health-related issues across many settings, and this isn't just like Zika's coming, from the airplane from Brazil to New York, but there is this globalization of health. Technology supports growth of teamwork at local levels. Technology is amazing. I had a fellow go to Malawi a couple of months ago. He's interested in ultrasound, and they're slowly but surely building the technology, but they're not in country enough to provide the supervision. I said, take your WhatsApp, you're on this stuff all the time, and get some videos of those ultrasound things, and send them back, and see if the quality is sufficient. And of course, that you can do that. You can do that between here and there. You can do that between the urban center and the village and within country. So the technology is there. And so really, to make things, move things forward, to really change the paradigm, we want to talk about bidirectionality. And I added the adjective transformative. This isn't just about, well, we let you come back, or we said, oh, wow, you did this way, you're there, but it's that we actually look at what you're doing, and it changes how we practice here. And so that's the transformative part that I think is so important. So, really for me personally, Chris kind of helped me get it all together. But you'll see from these 3 different areas of research, NGOs, and education that themes emerge. Collaborative partnerships, mutual benefits, social value, validity, bidirectionality. So I'd like to kind of shift and get a little more into where we're supposed to be talking now, and look at education, learners, what's going on, and take these are the 3 broad categories that the WAIT guidelines for ethical engagement for learners fall into. Obligations or recommendations for sending and hosting institutions, the trainees specifically, and the WAIT group talks about sponsors. I've co-opted that a little bit to talk about accountability. So let's get to a little bit more specific within each one of these categories. I have a particular bias that partnership is really the most fundamental part, a requirement for engagement. The Wikipedia definition of arrangement where parties are partners, agree to cooperate to advance their mutual interests. Irving Fish is a retired pediatric neurologist in New York. He met Tesfaye Menelik. Menelik was his resident. He came from Ethiopia to learn neurology from Irving. He wanted to do something in Ethiopia. And they sort of put their heads together and decided to try to develop a program for preschool readiness. Which turns out to be a really big deal for keeping children in school, which is, of course, a really big deal for their future. So they put this program together, and Tesfai is probably the only child psychiatrist in Ethiopia. And this program started about 11 years ago. Very much, I hate this adjective, but it really gets the point across, organic. You know, they were kind of stumbling along. What were they doing? Somehow Irving, with no experience in global health, knew that this partnership with Menelik and Tesfai was going to be fundamental to their success. And now they started out with 80 kids in their program, and now there's 11,000, and they're all over Addis Ababa. And to me, this is what partnership is about. How it's evolved over the years, how they've stopped and reevaluated, how they've learned, how they've brought more and more people in. And when you look at the literature review, and this is the study group for the American Board of Pediatrics, really what is going on for the host? And in their lit review, they really could look at, there were positive things. It really wasn't all like you're coming and just taking stuff from us. Professional development, opportunities to improvement, and being able to perhaps provide more services. But on the downside, there was, you come in here, and I tell learners, whenever they go abroad, you step off the airplane and you create work. Automatically, you're creating work for your host. No matter how much you think you're bringing with you, you've got to add that into that equation at the end of the day to get to the true sum of what you did. Really, providing services that you can't sustain. The volunteerism, the insufficient training, all of the things that end up being a big burden. And everyone has seen these stories, and sometimes they're on the front page of the paper. And sometimes they're misrepresented, even in the best situations. Really important considerations for the significance and the importance of partnership. Let's talk from the trainee point of view about preparation. Interestingly, in the ABP Global Health group that I've been talking to you about, when some of the literature that they were able to review, it is as of in 2013, 66% of pediatric residency programs actually offered preparation. Sounded pretty good to me. But what does preparation really mean? I mean, I know when Siri and I were doing it, I would make them come and sit and talk with me a couple times before they left. And I was always amazed at, how often someone would come back and have done something or had something happen or said something. And I'm like, we talked about that. How come you didn't get that? I thought you had it. My computer got stolen from the emergency department. It would get stolen from the emergency department at Bellevue. Are you nuts? Anyway, so interestingly, this is a consensus statement from a group of medical schools in Canada, where they were concerned that if you look at this graph here, they talk about, in terms of global health, low income, low resource settings, their Aboriginal health and vulnerable populations. Kind of so much more forward and broader thinking overall. But this shows you of the 10 programs that they surveyed, 2 of them had mandatory pre-departure training. I guess this is 5 had you could do it if you want, and then the rest were not available. So they were concerned about that and felt that it really was something that all of the programs should have. And they developed a set of recommendations that are really based around the CanMed, which is basically like the ACGME competencies in Canada. And you'll see that they're, professional, scholar, health advocate, leader. They're all the same ones that we basically see from our ACGME. And they linked the recommendations for pre-departure training and post-return debriefing to those competencies. So health advocate, global health and development, ethics of global health experience, communicator, cultural awareness, language competency. So, and I think we did this when we started out with the NYU students, and I think it's a very helpful way to actually get into work within our residency programs to develop pre-departure, post-return debriefing that fit in, makes it a lot easier for the residents to get credit for what they do. And it's probably a good way to think about it. This is, again, the American Board of Pediatrics Global Health Subgroup summary of their recommendations. It was a really exhaustive, it's 2017, published in 2017 with 100 and some odd references, literature review, and then a set of recommendations describing first the current scope of trainee involvement. And you can see we've gone over these numbers, 30% of medical students, depending on the residency programs, a lot, 20 to 50%. Across the board, when you looked at the literature review, concerns were felt very much within the structure of weight, logistics, safety, culture, impact on hosts. And in the end, in their summary and their recommendations, again, things that we would all agree are important. And then sort of at the end of it, they kind of say, well, who's going to get this done? And where's the accountability going to be? And they're kind of putting it back to professional organizations. This is a program that, and again, I'm a pediatrician, and so I try to have a broad review of the literature, but I do tend to have the stuff that relates to my own clinical practice pop up faster. But this was a group of 7 folks, mostly in the Midwest, who are all involved in global health, who got together to really think about what is pre-departure training. And they started out with just looking through the literature and through their own experiences to identify the issues that really come up most frequently for learners abroad. And in terms of in the idea of developing simulation, that could be used for training. So the emotions that they were targeting: frustration. I know what to do at home, but I can't do it here. Floundering. I don't know what to do. I don't know what to do for this condition, diseases that they don't know. Failure. I thought I knew what to do. I'm doing this and the patient is getting worse. And futility. Now I can do what I know how to do, but the patient isn't getting better. And then using the simulation to move towards adaptive characteristics. Adaptability, awareness of resources, humility, acknowledgement. And so they developed this program, and the simulations are very much, they're clinical, they're patient-based, but they're very much around not so much teaching you how to take care of malaria. They're short, rapid cycle type of simulation, but putting you in a situation where, like, okay, so you want to give 20 per kilo of normal saline, how are you going to do it? There isn't a nurse, there isn't there's not a pump, And so to really kind of bring out the circumstances and how do you feel about that. And when they piloted this with a group of 51 residents, 61 simulations, the feedback and what they're reporting is satisfaction. But interestingly and importantly, I think, they were able with these simulations to get that feeling from the residents, so that they really got that frustration, or they really got that feeling of failure. And then they actually began to change their preparations for leaving based on the sugar experience. And this has really developed, this paper was published in 2014, into a whole website with different modules and things that you can use to actually prepare learners for abroad. The sugar prep is the scenarios. There's these little mini ethics cases. It looks really cool on my slide. The first or second time I went to the website, I was easily able to access it. I don't know if I'm having sort of Luddite problems here in tech, but recently going to the site, I don't know if maybe the site isn't as robust as I had hoped. But we use this at Texas Children's. Everybody who goes abroad, whether they're residents, even the Global Health Corps that they hire to staff some of their HIV sites, go through these trainings before they leave. How effective it is, I think you have to monitor and evaluate, but at least it's something you can do. You have to start on start from your own. Another thing that I found, and I didn't find much else that was similar to sugar, but these are videos that were put together by Stanford Bioethics Group, and I think this is like sort of cultural context, cultural humility. This is a Afghani man with stomach cancer who makes all of his treatment decisions with a friend as an interpreter. Then his daughter comes and says, but he didn't understand. Why didn't you offer him more? This is a mother from Southeast Asia who has a child with congenital heart disease. Her mother doesn't want the child to have surgery because the scar on the chest will be bad for her spiritual development. You know, this is just the tip of the iceberg, but something, if people don't have some kind of a context for that. You guys probably already all read The Spirit Catches You When You Fall Down. If you haven't, find it. It's a wonderful, wonderful book about a child with intractable epilepsy from the Hmong, a refugee from the Hmong culture. And you sort of look at it in the front, you think she is just going to blast the hell out of our medical system. And she really doesn't. She really shows in a very balanced way how the frustrations of care providers here who are really trying to do the right thing and the whole culture of that they were working within. So who's accountable? Who's supposed to put this all together so that we're doing the right thing ethically, so that we're really preparing and debriefing and whatever? And it could be any of these groups. We've got, you know, our credentialing boards, we've got our education, you know, regulators, we've got our professional societies, and sort of our special interest groups. Let's see where this really kind of comes together. This was a proposal for medical student curriculum, and what was interesting to me about it was on the triangle is really about the learner. The learner comes in and says, you know, sort of, how do I justify that I want to do this global health outreach work? And I need to learn more about health disparities. The ethics of global health becomes part of that, and then we kind of get to the whole package of the pyramid. And then what you see on the right is how all of the different aspects of what's going to go on in the global health outreach work fit into ethical principles, resource allocation, justice, respect for autonomy. Now this is where I show you how little I know about real philosophy. This one, I have to look and see. The ontological ethics, this is Kant. You know, it doesn't matter what the outcome is, but if my motives are pure, it's okay. I think we're kind of not totally on board with that. Then the consequentialism was it only matters what happens at the end. Maybe that's true, but I would say we probably form more within the utilitarian school. You know, we kind of want to do what we can with what we have within a general ethical framework. And just a couple more ways that people are thinking about this. These are a group of university-based global health academics who put together this consensus idea of what really essential principles should be. I think what you see here, this was published in 2016, now we begin to see really the host-based, community, you know, receiving-based perspective. It's not all about the learners. Now we're really beginning to see the fact that for these, they're talking about these global health missions, which 55% of what residents do are short-term electives. So they are, when everyone even says mission, I'm like, please don't say that. But in effect, it kind of is that. Let's call it what it is and see if we can still put it into a framework that we consider reasonable, ethical, and perhaps productive. So cross-cultural effectiveness, I so much like the term cultural humility as opposed to cultural competence. You know, cultural competence is like, I can pass an exam. Not so much. Humility really implies to me recognizing that this is something I don't know. This is something I need to really be aware of. The bidirectionality and by participatory relationships, and we've seen that theme throughout. Over and over again, you see in the literature the importance of longitudinal engagement for sustainability. And it really makes me begin to wonder if there's any value at all in one-offs. And if really what we want to be thinking more and more about is how we pair learners with settings that really are going to be there for far longer than when the learner comes through. And then the fact that it's really based on what the community prioritizes, what the community needs, where the community can allocate resources, especially when you're talking about a short-term experience where, you know, what we really have to be mindful of not taking away from what's already there. And Carrie's group for the American College of Physicians put together these principles, and you'll see, I think, a similar theme coming from them. You know, beneficence, non-malfeasance, improving health and well-being, minimizing the burden on the communities, respect for persons for cultural differences, the idea of preparation, debriefing, and making sure that these experiences occur within responsible organizations. I very, very much like these last two papers and their perspective that they bring. I just want to point out that the authors on both of them are all from American institutions. We really have a way to go as we continue to very responsibly and with the best intentions engage our partners abroad. This is, you know, the Canadians do such cool stuff. Anyone here from Canada? Trained in Canada? Yeah, this is actually a tool for developing research partnerships. But if you really look at it, it developed multinational collaboration, evidence-based, field-tested. It takes you through to the point of saying, well, you know, when you want to start out, here's a checklist. Sit down with your partner and start to talk about these things. And it doesn't just leave you from the beginning. You know, it really says now you're getting into it, you're starting to implement it. All right, how's it going? Are you having problems? Is it time to really rethink pieces of this? Because you know it never finishes the way it started out. If you think it's going to, you're going to fail because you're going to miss opportunities to do things better. And then the dissemination. And for the research project, there's an ending. I would also submit that for our work, the system strengthening, we also are always working towards the ending. And the success of the project is that we've really, the services that we put in, that we've helped to put in place, whatever the program results are there, and we're not. And wow, that's the end of a good deal. So I just recommend this to you. I think it's even just to think through in a broad way. And then specifically the American Board of Pediatrics Global Health Group kind of passed off their stuff through the Academy of Pediatrics. And this is something that will be available in the fall from pediatric programs or from anybody. And it includes curriculum development, pre-departure, post-return debriefing, really very specific recommendations, exhaustive literature review. And yeah, it's almost ready to go. So let's just finish up by talking about a couple of specific situations or training where how this educational stuff has played out. University of Pennsylvania has had a partnership with the University of Botswana for, it's probably been about 15 years. It's been a really long time. It started out in very much research-based with HIV. As you probably know, the burden of HIV in Botswana is mind-boggling. And more has gotten into really this Botswana UPenn partnership, BUP. There have been something like 400 Penn learners who have gone to Botswana over the course of the relationship, and about 100 people from Botswana who have come to Penn in different capacities. So the door's swinging pretty, better than a lot of other places both ways. What is remarkable about this publication is how frank they really were and how willing they really were to put their dirty laundry out on the line about things that worked and things that didn't work there. And you can see some of the big areas, preparation of their learners, the cultural competence thing, trainee supervision as a problem at UB, and how to, and this is still, in my current work at the Texas Children's, I have some interactions in Botswana, and this is still an issue, how to really engage their academic faculty with the programs that they're doing. It's a new medical school, it's a young, but seeing all of this is, it's really reassuring that they're willing to look at it. And let me conclude, not too much more time, with just, what I did when I was thinking about this talk was I talked to some people at Texas Children's about what their experiences have been. And so let me just share this anecdote with you, knowing that it's below the lowest quality of evidence, but the stories are always good. BPI, the Baylor International Pediatric AIDS Initiative, has been in Africa for probably 12, 13 or more years. In various sites, they've built clinics, they've, PEPFAR kind of really spurred Mark Klein on to provide care for children, because it was a huge gap. As everything started out, it was all people were afraid of how to dose the kids, and medications weren't always in formulations that children could use. And they have had tremendous success in reaching large numbers of children. But the BPI model was really to create a bubble within the community. This beautiful facility, clinical facility where they work. Each site has some independence and some interaction with the public hospital or wherever else they're doing, but they're pretty much in a bubble. Residents from the pediatric residency program at Texas Children's go there in large numbers to do a very structured 3-week elective. They're, interestingly, for all of the volume of trainees who go abroad from Texas Children's, there really isn't they're just developing a formal preparation system. So the BPI experience for a learner is very contrived. They're within this situation. They do get to see children from that community. They do get to live in that community, although it's still within the bubble of BPI. It's very controlled. And there's always a question of what do you do when you're there for 3 weeks and then you go on vacation. So Global Hope is a program of building HEMONC programs within Africa in the infrastructure of BPI, just starting out. And that's where I work. And the reason I put it up here is just to tell you a story of an experience we really just recently had with 2 residents who both are interested in HEMONC and wanted to go to our program in Malawi. We were lucky to have really close connections with some of the people on the ground there, and we knew that palliative care, there was expertise there, and it was really an important part of what they were trying to develop. So spending some time with the students before they left, we were able to outline a very straightforward project of taking a pain assessment tool and putting it into the medical record, so it would be the 6th vital sign. And because the students were incredibly humble and willing to do any kind of work to get it done, it got done, and it really turned out to be a successful project. We'll be able to go back, we'll be able to QI it, we'll be able to see that it's really a part of the care that kids get in that clinic. Pachamake is 2.5 years in, and it's a really interesting collaboration between Baylor, Cincinnati, University of North Carolina, and Utah. And I got to tell you, at Texas Children's, when someone says UNC, especially in hematology, their head spins around. It's like they need an exorcist. The whole idea at these higher levels of research in academia, they've been competing with each other for years. These guys they're all emergency medicine, and they just started out close to the ground, building these relationships and negotiating, interestingly, making all the mistakes that we've all made with the local partner in terms of not listening, how it overloaded how it was not as helpful as it could be, and have really come together now, I think, with the potential to do something really powerful, so that they're able to provide some type of on-site presence of either general pediatricians or pediatric emergency medicine specialists, providing clinical care at the first pass. The research, we don't even talk about that. That's even a BPI thing, is not to even talk about the research. The first thing is to talk about clinical care. But interestingly, even in the context of this very self-aware program, I was talking with one of the fellows who went, she went, probably, I want to say it was probably 2010, 2011. No, it was after that. I was in New York. It was 2013, so recently. And she gets there, she has no idea, she's in the middle of the rainy season. As you can imagine, there's 3 or 4 kids on each bed, 5 kids or more die every day, and she's completely overwhelmed. No support. She was in the situation, in one of the better, maybe better programs, with a better understanding of what was going on the ground. She was the one who had to come back and say, we got to do something better. And fortunately, that has happened. So in summary, What do I think? So the basic framework that we should be thinking about for trainees from an ethical point of view: partnerships. I really think that is so important. I've been involved in groups who were not willing to take the time to really develop those partnerships. My experience is limited, but those programs failed. Trainee preparedness, monitoring and evaluation. I mean, how can you do anything and not look at what's happening? What are the outcomes? How can we change this? How can we make it better? Are we really doing what we think we're doing? And then, of course, bidirectionality. So at that note, I think we have a panel and we'll have some discussion. You don't have to. Oh, thank you.
So I think as we invite panelists up, maybe if the audience has questions, we could take a couple.
Sure.
Get organized. If that's,
Sure.
yeah.
Happily.
I have a more of a general question.
Sure.
What would be the best strategy to get more pediatric presence at our meetings within our group, and to really start sharing those common themes that are not unique to pediatrics?
Yeah.
Especially the logistical and programmatic pieces.
Yeah, it's interesting that you say that. I mean, I wasn't surprised, but in looking across the literature, how it's really siloed by program. More and more people that I know in pediatrics are participating in CUGH. So I don't know if that's you interface with that organization, but I'm seeing that more and more. But they still tend to sit within like the APPDs groups for ACGME that's pediatric people. So that's a really good question. I think, cause I kept thinking, I know there's more going on in other specialties besides pediatrics, but anybody got any good ideas? Speak up.
It'd be nice to start breaking those silos. I think there's a lot to share, and I think I think CUGH is a wonderful organization. I just don't know if it's geared towards practicing clinicians, and that's what we are.
Right.
And really, where a lot of the adoption and resistance to change and cultural issues need to be discussed is at the provider level, preparation, self-reflection, and then structure of each interaction over time that you've mentioned a couple of times just in the last few minutes, how they've made all the mistakes you could make, they finally got it. Well, I think there's a way to avoid making those mistakes if we get together.
Well, interesting, the second to the last paper, the one where they will use the term short-term, the STAG thing, that and Carrie's stuff was really geared towards practitioners, and that's a tough group. I mean, at least with the learners, we got some rules we can smack down on them if they want to do stuff. But for people who want to go, I remember I was in Texas during when the Haiti earthquake started, and people were just hopping on the plane. And one of my friends who's Dominican. And is a pediatrician, he said he was in the DR, he went to the border just to take care of the people who came so they wouldn't go to Haiti and take resources away from Haiti. So people do want to do this kind of stuff and not always, and they're going to be hard to reach. Yeah. Okay. I'm just going to leave this here. And I'm going to take this off.
That's actually, I guess while they're setting up, that's actually a great segue into the second panel. And just to kind of orient those of you who, reorient those of you who have joined us now. Annalise and I each had separate mandates for sessions that we were organizing, but we're good friends and love working together, so we were talking about it a lot. And at a certain point, we said, we should just kind of join this and make it one big thing. So, you know, the concept was I was supposed to be organizing some kind of programming on specifically residency review and how do we think about ethical issues with regard to these learners. And Annalise was supposed to, you know, broaden it out and be focused on ethics more broadly within international medical initiatives. And we thought, you know, these were really a lot of the same themes but developed differently. And let's see if we can't put that together and use Sue's wonderful, more kind of academic and structured analysis of the literature that's more robust, I think, in the area of education and learners to segue into a conversation that would be more broad on ethics. So welcome to part 2, and over to Annalise.
Hi, I'm Annalise.
Okay.
There's a button.
I think I'm not sure.
Sue, did you have a clip-on mic?
And if it's
Can
a
I?
little button on the left,
Annalise,
you just
yeah.
press it for a few seconds.
Okay.
Does anybody know where the clip-on mic is? Okay. So just so you know that that's what will record it, not the other
So I think
mic.
maybe
So we
this-
have to just pass it around a little bit.
Right.
And the mic is that thing that's hanging down.
So I guess when you guys talk, that'll
Yeah.
be the talking stick.
That's the talking stick, exactly.
need it too.
Okay.
We can repeat the question.
Okay.
And then, yeah.
Okay, great.
So I'm Annalise DeWolf. I'm the International Division, the Division of International Emergency Medicine Director at LSU in New Orleans at the new charity hospital. And I did my fellowship in International Emergency Medicine here at Downstate, which is how I got connected with all these fine folks. I'm going to have you all introduce yourselves.
Does this work? Can you?
No.
You have to use both.
Yep.
All right. All right. Great. This is gonna be interesting. We can do this.
You can talk into that.
doesn't have to be that close to your mouth.
Oh, okay.
The other one does so that we can hear you.
Got it. So my name is Braden Hexum. I'm a residency program director for emergency medicine at Rush Medical College in Chicago. And my approach to this is I've been involved in international emergency medicine kind of at all levels, from a medical student to a residency to a junior faculty trying to manage a site in Liberia. And now I'm looking at it from the assessing applicants and trying to figure out their actual and true interest in global health and their motivations, and trying to assess where they should go and how. So that's what I hope to bring to the discussion today.
Hi, ooh, sorry. I'm Jennifer Tobin. I too actually am from Rush University in Chicago. I got involved in international global health actually as an attending, but I have been participating in it for 10, 11 years now. My role at this time is I am the program director for the global health track at Rush for the internal medicine and med-peds residents, and I'm helping to work with the pediatric department, who's just now starting a global health track as well. In addition to the track residents, I coordinate the residents who do more of the global health elective, so more of a one-week experience. We send teams to a rural part of the Dominican Republic, as well as a clinic that we are working with outside of Port-au-Prince in Haiti. We've been sending teams to the same place in the Dominican Republic since about 2007, and to this same place in Haiti since just after the earthquake.
Complicated. I know. Double fisting. So my name is Sari Sahoyan, and I am an associate professor of emergency medicine with an academic appointment at New York University, and also the clinical coordinator for emergency medicine and the sole faculty in emergency medicine at the Korlebu Teaching Hospital, which is the national hospital of Ghana in Accra, where I've been working full-time for the past 7 years to start a department of emergency medicine at the hospital.
You just turned off.
And I did just turn off the microphone. Awesome.
You can use the other.
And we're back. I have a background in medical anthropology, and which I was involved with before deciding to switch into practical and applied medical anthropology, and also a somewhat international upbringing. So for me, I think even for the period of time that I was training here at Downstate and my residency and in my fellowship at NYU, I was also practicing international medicine because I had not actually come from the United States, either socially, culturally, or in terms of my medical training, which was done, or initial medical training, which was done in Canada. So that's been my involvement.
So my Is that on? Okay. My name is Carrie Horwich, and I'm actually an outpatient internal medicine physician. Outpatient. Yes, it doesn't.
Or if it's a battery issue, maybe
Hello?
just use this.
I'll just use one of these.
It's on already.
It's on already, okay. I'm an outpatient internal medicine physician. I'm also an HIV care specialist, and by way of background into international medicine, I started out by doing some as a medical student, probably making every single one of the mistakes that we presented in our global health ethics paper, because I had no training, no background, no education, no pre-planning, and no post-planning after the event. And then did my training in Arizona, actually at University of Arizona, and residency training in Arizona as well. Became an HIV specialist, and then managed to get with several programs to come to Africa and do several training where the goal actually was sustainability. So really teaching people to actually be able to build their capacity. And so through all of that, got more education in ethics, and really found that there's a lot of things that we should be doing better, seeing some really problematic things being done in other countries, sometimes with beneficence as the overriding mandate, however, not necessarily recognizing the harm that was being done. So happy to talk about my experiences with that.
Well, I guess Sari probably said some things about what I have done. I would say it's mostly been with system strengthening, starting out with, my first experience was in Dubai, actually, helping them become an international training center for the American Heart Association. But what I learned there was the importance of partnerships, and one of my colleagues there is still a very dear friend. Then have worked mostly in system strengthening education in Southern Africa and Central America, and now I'm dealing with hematology oncologists. It's a whole nother ball game. So anyway, yeah.
So I'm going to start with a first question to get us started. Sue, you talked a lot about building bi-directional partnerships and that ideal, and I wanted to get from you all experiential stories and what your thoughts are about, have you been able to developing relationships with your host communities or host institutions, have you ever found that the goals that you come into it with, or that you initially understand in your memorandum of agreement or whatever, have you found during those experiences that those goals actually aren't what you both stepped into thinking what it was, and where did you go from there with that?
So I think my most formative experience with that was in Liberia. So prior to the Ebola epidemic, we had been working in Liberia for a number of years, and this was a collaborative program with a number of institutions that were US-based, University of Massachusetts and Yale, Brown, University of Chicago, and where I was at the time, Mount Sinai here in New York. And the initial partnership had very well structured kind of goals and objectives of coming in to basically help advise in their building of emergency resources with their teaching hospital. And what we didn't anticipate, I think, the first couple of years of that project were very good because we were very goal-oriented in trying to meet those objectives and develop some structures and protocols. What we didn't anticipate was that the shifting priorities of Ministry of Health in the country didn't allow us to adapt that initial objective plan. And so the beginning initial enthusiasm was, let's put a lot of resources into it, and the country was doing a great job of providing capacity and resources to help us meet those objectives. As they realized we were starting to do a really good job, it actually facilitated them pulling resources away later on because they had to shore up other areas of their healthcare system that we weren't even involved with. And so it ended up being more of an excuse for decreasing resources later, and we didn't anticipate how to adapt to that. And ultimately the program folded because of the inability to make that happen. I don't know what other people's experiences were.
So I'll talk a little bit about sort of the HIV experience. The HIV experience. So for those who are familiar, the scale up of treatment in resource limited settings with HIV really started in 2003 in a big way. And I was involved in a pilot program in Zambia, which was going to be a very small project with one clinic in an area where we were going to train that staff. We always went in as a multidiscipline team, which I think is actually critical for really teaching what I would call system-based practice and recognizing the team-based approach, which is actually fairly novel for a lot of countries. And we started with that small group, and then we would come back and do follow-up training a few months later. Well, the follow-up training coincided with the increase in PEPFAR funding for many countries. And so what happened is we were coming in expecting to do follow-up training for our initial cohort to see how they were doing, to kind of see what else they needed from us. And we came in, and the day before we were supposed to start our training, we were told that we had to train everybody in the country who was going to be going out throughout that country into the clinics as part of the PEPFAR. So what we had initially thought was going to be, you know, higher, a little bit more advanced, we actually had to train close to 80 people in 5 days to actually be able to get their clinic started as part of the PEPFAR. So that's where I would say some of the skills that are needed if you're going to do international medicine is you've got to be flexible. You have to anticipate that there are going to be things that are not going to be standard, that will change at a moment's notice, and you have to be able to adapt to it. And one of the things I would say is if you really don't have skills to adapt to different situations, then maybe going and doing international medicine in other countries isn't for you. And I think that we have to be honest with our trainees that that is part of it, and getting some of that training to be able to do that, because we literally had to completely rewrite in one night our entire curriculum and divvy up how we were going to actually divvy up the groups that had a little bit more expertise and less expertise to be able to give that country, because that's what they asked us to do for them, to give them what they wanted from us, which was the whole goal.
Okay, so if I understand correctly, this question is really about mismatch in expectations and how we negotiate that with our partners to be able to do work in such a way that we're expressing the principle of autonomy in our work and negotiating the fine balance between beneficence and autonomy. Is that roughly what we're answering? Okay. So, I mean, this is a hard one for me because I'm, I think, still processing and on a journey to understand in a reflective way that I can share exactly what my experience and involvement has been in my primary site. I seem to have taken a deep dive approach in my career in international medicine. And you know, one of the real challenges that I've faced that has been central to my own analysis of ethics and what I'm doing, how to do it better, is it okay, you know, that kind of internal debate has been that when I first went to Ghana, I was there on behalf of a U.S. institution who wanted to create an academic partnership in global health. And the hospital that I was developing this relationship with, or seeking to build a partnership with, really didn't want to partner with that institution. And there wasn't an obvious local partner who was doing already the work that the hospital wanted me to try to help them with. So it wasn't clear where I fit in, and initially there was some interest within internal medicine and some interest within the Department of Pediatrics, and then, but really kind of very fractured, and nobody wanted to do all emergencies, you know, meaning kids, women, men, you know, they wanted to really keep it split, that the OBGYN does OBGYN emergencies, and the peds does the peds, and the medicine does the medicine, and the surgery does the surgery, and orthopedics does trauma, and never those partners shall meet. So it wasn't really clear who my local partner would be, and at an institutional level, they said, yeah, so we don't even want the US institution, but we'll give you a job, right? So effectively, the structure of my involvement was that I became the local partner. You know, I took a job, became a Ministry of Health employee, and said, yeah, I'll try to fight this battle. So already, there was going to be a mismatch in expectation, right? Because I had a different view of what emergency medicine was and what it represented at an institutional level, and at a social level, very practically, you know, just forget philosophy, like grounded. Is it one building or is it 5 buildings, right? You know, that's a real difference of opinion and a mismatch in expectation, and they hired me to negotiate and fight those battles. So, but here I am, an outsider, and I'm not Ghanaian, and I didn't understand the culture, and I knew that I didn't understand the culture. People were talking about stuff I had no idea. They're speaking English, but there's all this kind of weird stuff, and I don't know if it means what they means, and it turns out, yeah, there was a lot of stuff going on that I wasn't aware of. People believe in spirits. Ghosts are there. You know, you can put a hex on somebody. I mean, there's stuff going on that was not part of my worldview, and that really, on a very practical, grounded level, at the bedside and in larger negotiations, influenced stuff and made it hard for me to feel confident that I wasn't imposing ideas from outside, like a vision of what emergency medicine was and should be, and how to advocate for patients and do the patient care, you know, that wasn't really appropriate in the environment. So all this is to say, this is, yes, mismatch, and how did I manage it? Talk to people a lot, read stuff a lot, have a lot of anxiety attacks, and really try to build that friend cohort and find the allies, both in the larger global intellectual community and then also locally in various disciplines, who could help me think through specific problems as they arose, again, at the bedside and larger negotiations.
Just to bring Sari's experience back a little bit to what we were talking about education and learners, is on top of all of the mishigas at the level of the hospital, we were sending trainees left and right from NYU, medical students, residents from internal medicine to Ghana, to have Sari basically babysit for them, help develop their project, and it was an incredibly important learning experience for me to see how much it distracted her from the work that she was sent there to do, and how much it really messed up the system. There was actually, you know, from students who are getting their master's in public health and global health, who were going to do projects that stripped resources from the emergency department and added expense and all kinds of burden with no preparation. People who were having meltdowns, and Sari was their therapist and their, you know, whatever. So we were just making it harder on our end, which is how I really got pushed into this notion of what, because I wasn't ever that interested, to be frank, in the education of U.S. learners. I was much more interested in the systems that were going on in the country. But when I saw this, I thought, whoa, this is something I can do right here at home. So, you know, building that, even that sort of partnership on the NYU side was not without its challenges.
So my brief anecdote is a bit more on the entry level. But when we first started working in Haiti, we were working on partnerships with several different communities as we explored and got to know the area better. And one thing that we set out from the beginning, as I imagine most of you here believe as well, is that this is meant to be a partnership. This is not meant for us to come in and be the Americans at the table dictating how things happen. And we set out in the beginning with the conversation of what do you envision, what do you want from your community, what can we help you with. And with one community in particular, we went through this exercise and did all of this, and things were going great. But as we learned, they were no longer holding up their end of the bargain, and that we were coming to clinic and our paper charts had been left in the rain and were rodent eaten, that they were not sending community leaders to be present and to participate in clinic. They were not working on recruiting patients, etc. Some of the basic, that's what they were to bring to the table. And so then it created the ethical dilemma, moral dilemma of this is not what we set out for, this is not what we want, this is pulling resources, our resources that we have to bring away from other communities. And then we're faced with the situation of having multiple meetings with them, revisiting, this is what we talked about, this is what we agreed upon, this is what we need to, for the partnership to work. And ultimately they were unable to bring those basic things to the table, and we ended up actually having to part ways with that community to redirect the resources we had to another community who was invested, who was bringing to the table what they had promised and living up to the agreement.
Mm-hmm. So there's a couple themes that have come up in what you guys are talking about, one of which is mentoring and mentoring learners and having the humility and the cultural competence to exist in a setting. And Sarah, you've got a lot of experience with talking people through that process and getting them exposed to those ideas. Mm-hmm. And I know that several of you are actually working with people as they talk about their ideals about international medicine, and how much do you think, I've got so many questions about this, but one is, how do you think when people come to you, do you feel like their expectations match reality, and then how do you negotiate that?
People being learners.
Yeah.
Kara's like, oh, me.
You can have this one and then this one.
It's a lot of moving parts here. So I'll just start. I'm also, one of the other hats I wear in Seattle is as one of the key faculty for our internal medicine residency. And a lot of medical students who are coming in for residency and residents have an interest in international medicine. I'm not actually sure they know what that means. I'm not sure a lot of people know what that means, quite honestly, because the definitions vary. And so one of the things that I think is really important is to really kind of find out what they envision is what they think they're going to be doing. So a lot of people saying, well, I want to help everybody. It's like, okay, well, you're a physician, so you will be helping people, but what do you mean by doing international health or international medicine? And I think that's actually one of the challenges, I think, in medical schools and residencies is really actually trying to help define that for our students and our residents by what they actually can do. They are licensed physicians, but they are not fully trained physicians when they are residents. And that brings up some barriers. And I think it also brings up some of the ethical challenges that I have seen is when residents, and I'm sure many of us have these experiences, residents engage in a project, they get to a country, then the trained clinician who is supposed to be their attending and preceptor hasn't had a vacation in several months and leaves the resident, or maybe it's even the student, behind to take care of the clinic, and that is unethical. We would never allow that in this country. And if we would not allow it in our own practices for an unsupervised resident to have say over patient care, it should not be allowed in another country. And we actually have to prepare residents for that, from the moral dilemma of being able to say, I'm sorry, I can't stay and do this because I am not supervised here. I'm also not licensed in your country to practice medicine without a license, which is also another ethical barrier. And that's a lot of the things that I think in a lot of the papers that have been written really don't come to the forefront until you're actually faced with boots on the ground, so to speak, of what can happen to you. So I really try to find out what they mean, and if they are going to work with a global, so my institution doesn't have a global partnership with anyone, but I really try to get them to identify what it is that they want to do and engage in. And my personal belief is that I think the best we do for practices is actually increase their capacity to take care of themselves in their own country. And so more sustainable development, really, rather than going in and doing a disease-based focus, which unfortunately is how things are funded. And that's the other thing I think with international medicine, and maybe medicine in this country, is it's very siloed in terms of who has the money. And so when TB gets a bunch of money, then you have all these programs for TB. When HIV got all the PEPFAR money, you have a bunch of programs for HIV. And what we realized with doing the HIV is that you actually have to have the entire system in place to be able to care for these folks in a continuity fashion, and you can't do it as just a disease specific. So it may be how the funding starts, but you actually have to continue that in some other way, and that's by developing system capacity.
Well, I could probably talk for the next 5 days continuously about this this particular question, and maybe I'll say a few things, and then Sue will probably want to jump in and talk about sort of the structures that we tried to put into place. As I think we've already alluded to, we worked together a lot to try to handle or do something around this mentorship and learner component in global health, specifically as it related to learners at all levels and from multiple disciplines, clinical and non-clinical, coming to visit me, in my shop, so to speak, in Accra. And I have a kind of unique perspective on this because I have been for years. I've had over, I think we're up to like 175 people from different programs, different, schools, different disciplines come and want to participate in global health experiences in which effectively I was the local partner. Right? So I'm playing this kind of dual role. So I was the local partner, and I was also, as is often the case with many local partners, we talk about you step off the plane and you're automatically a burden. I can attest, yes, you are at any level, whether you're senior faculty coming to visit and help out, or a medical student. It's an equal burden. And my experience was I was kind of thrust into this role. Well, I'm sole faculty. I have administrative and clinical responsibility for an emergency department with a 15% mortality rate, a 7-day length of stay, a burden of illness and disease, really sick patients, and about 60 people in the building at any given time that I had responsibility for on some level. I was overwhelmed, right? And I'm already trying to, make sure people aren't dying while trying to build systems, and now I got to take care of your learning experience and make that structured and academically productive, and it was really hard, So, and what I kind of started to notice over time is that learners did sort out, and where these ethical challenges arose, right, and became problematic, kind of sort out consistently into several buckets, and the way I think about it is there's a personal integrity bucket, right, and we should probably be looking out for that when we're looking at this pre-departure phase and trying to talk to people about their motives. And I tend to look for, at this point, how honest is this person with regard to their expectations, right? What are they saying? And when I hear somebody say, I'm going to help, like, I don't want you. God, I don't have time for that. Please don't come and help me. I beg you, don't come and help me. So that's kind of a red flag that I've identified over the years, and the reason why is that if somebody has an emotional investment in helping, it frequently makes them inflexible with regard to their ability to hear, really hear, what is my need right now? Maybe my need right now is to not deal with your learning and your, go stand in the corner, watch, talk to a patient, it's going to be great, but don't do anything, right? So that is a red flag for me in terms of potential issues with personal integrity that we're going to have to address and watch out for and be ready to manage. And then I recognize that this kind of cultural competency, cultural humility, those problems tend to be problems of lost in translation, right? Best of intention, I'm talking English, you're talking English, we're using the same words, but they mean completely different things. We've got to negotiate that. And so I try to look for, as this person is speaking, do they have experience interacting with people of other cultures? Do they speak another language? Do they have some framework for understanding that language is much more complicated than syntax, so to speak. And then I think about systems-based practice, right? So some of the really devastating ethical issues that have come up for me as a mentor over the years, I've had several residents who knew that they were coming and that they were not to do clinical work, that they had to be careful, and we gave them tools to be able to manage situations that would arise in which they would feel that they'd been asked to either do something clinical for a patient to help save a situation, or because they began to feel a sense of urgency about a clinical situation, like, oh my God, this person's going to die and nobody's doing anything, and I got to do something, right? And those are very dangerous times for people, and I've certainly watched them do clean kills by failing to understand that medicine is not transportable around the world, and the protocols and the practices and the skills that you learn in the United States do not map directly onto the disease states and the systems that are available to manage those in other places. And I know for me, I started working in Ghana as somebody who was like 3 years out from fellowship. The first 2 years I did my anthropology thing. I sat, I watched, I occasionally gave an opinion, but I did not take on a direct clinical care role because I was deeply sensitive to my failure to understand or be able to manage systems-based practice in that environment, not knowing the cultural, situatedness of my patients and their families. And I had to learn a lot and get a lot of mentorship. And really my experience is that right, you got to be sensitive to the fact that treating DKA, you can't just give a bunch of insulin. You got to be careful because you don't have an EKG and you don't have a VBG and you can't monitor that potassium. And so the things that you think are going to be life-saving might actually be, and that was one of our clean kills. Another one had to do with fluid balance. I'm convinced that fluid management or fluid balance and resuscitation strategies in Africans, it's actually a different set of protocols. And we learned, you give them 30 cc's per kilo to manage sepsis, and that it kills them because they're all walking around with this chronic anemia, chronic disease. They've got some degree of cardiac dysfunction from that process, and when you try to resuscitate them too quickly, too fast, you kill them. So, those are subtle things that it takes time to learn clinically, and that's the systems-based practice piece where it can fall down with the best of intentions. And then the last one I think is just safety and recognizing that, when we're in a new environment, we're scared, we're tired, we're jet lagged, we haven't eaten properly, we were on anti-malarials, we got belly ache because the food wasn't right, we're going to be impaired, we're going to be more irritable, we're going to be more stressed, and we're going to be more likely to fall into those traps with the best of intentions. So I kind of look out for how responsible is this person in understanding those things and creating those boundaries and being flexible. How do they talk about it, and how do we help them in all of those 4 domains while they're on the ground?
So this past year for me has been really enlightening because I'm a new residency program director, and I interviewed 160 medical students who are applying for my program in emergency medicine. More than 100 of them said they want to go abroad and do global health work, right? And their responses for, well, tell me what that means to you, right, is just incredible. The range of what their expectations are, it just blew me away. And I came from having been around a lot of people who said that in the past. And so I kind of expected some of this, but I was just continuously surprised at just the I want to help group. And then the ones that have had real formative experiences and feel that they have skills to, this is what they want to do with their career, and here's how I'm going to do it. So there's this huge range in there. And as somebody who has to now assess these learners, these applicants to who's going to fit well in my program, and how can I mentor them if they do end up with me to actually do this, or guide them away from it if it seems like this is not really the right role for them. And so having been the unhelpful medical student in the past, and having been the overwhelmed second-year resident with a bunch of medical students running a trauma center in Honduras, I understand the limitations of what those expectations translate into in reality. And so now when I ask my applicants, you know, tell me what that means for you when they say I want to go abroad and work and help, I'm trying to figure out what is their career path over the next 3 years with me in residency. And so much of it has absolutely nothing to do with their time abroad. And in fact, I hope to minimize their time abroad while in residency to a few weeks, because I need them to learn other things in residency. And so I say, you're coming to a residency program that's brand new, that has absolutely no global health program, but I will make you better at a potential career in global health than if you went to a residency program that had a very strong track. This is part of myself, right? Because I'm gonna get you on our hospital QI committee, right? I'm gonna get you on our administrative committees. You're gonna help learn how to develop curriculum in my program that might actually be translatable skills later on, right? And so when you go off and become a clinician and actually can do something, you'll have the skills to do it. So that's how I help to manage some of those expectations of learners who don't understand really what they're saying sometimes.
In my experience thus far, I knock on wood or whatever you will, have not had too many glaring episodes of red flags on our experience or trips. As I think we may get into in a minute, we have had some of the social media things we've had to navigate, but as far as other anecdotes that people have shared, we've been, I think, like I said, knock on wood, quite fortunate. The other thing I try to balance, though, to potentially counter what some people have said, is that with the experience, with the work that I participate in, experiences we offer are more of the 1 week experiences. And so I also try to look at it as though this isn't a 1 month. The experiences that we afford we'll always have certified providers going with them, so there will not be the opportunity to send a learner there and then the local provider go on the much needed vacation that they have. But I also want to look at this as an opportunity to provide healthcare, provide education, provide training, but also provide an educational experience for our learners in a well-supervised manner, so that they will not have the opportunity to give too much insulin or over-resuscitate, but at the same time, they may have no idea what their wish to help people, I think, may be true and pure, but because they've never had an opportunity to experience international medicine, don't totally understand what that means. And I want to be able to share that with them, and that's part of the educational experience, is to better understand, yeah, you want to help people, but what does that mean? And help them better understand the pros, the cons, the barriers, and how, wow, that's really simplistic and, what's the word I'm looking for? Oh my gosh, brain fart. Just like, I can't think of it. Naive, and yes, that would be amazing, but that's not really reality. Yes, yes, of course, that's what we all want, but let's come back down to reality and what it is, and what does that really mean, and what can really be accomplished in a short time, albeit with a scenario that we have where we go every few months, that a continuity of care experience.
Quick question about kind of related to this. We struggle with our mentoring new residents and you know, medical school graduates in terms of basic people skills. Their emotional intelligence is very low. Their, you know, their empathy is, you know, they tend to be more on the selfish side. Not all of them, but, you know, that's the generational trend, unfortunately. No offense to new generations. And part of the problem I see is that with that as a baseline, when people then engage in international efforts, the level of complexity above and beyond the simple people skills is so intricate that I think there's a lot of unintended offenses that occur on a daily basis without the person involved even being aware that they're doing anything wrong. And what I heard just, you know, from the gentleman is that there's a 1-month experience, and this is same, you know, similar to what some of our programs do at St. Luke's. And how do you prepare someone? How much time do you need to spend to just prep them for that 1 month? And how much within that 1 month is actually the learning curve for the actual cultural competency? Again, it's a big, formidable challenge.
So I'm just going to say something quickly. I hear your point about emotional intelligence. I think it's really variable with our learners. I don't actually think it's a millennial thing or anything else. I think there are plenty of very skilled clinicians who do fine in their own environment, and yet you get them to a different environment, regardless of how old they are, how much they've worked, and they cannot do it well. One experience I had was in Papua New Guinea, and I was a medical student, and they were telling me a story of a surgeon who had come to that area. Now, they have a very specific plan of care for every patient because they don't have a lot of physicians, they don't have a lot of hospitals, and so they have trained a lot of what would be almost considered, you know, an orderly, so to speak, to do certain care at a certain level, and then you have to move. If they can't do that, then they have to move up the chain. And they had a surgeon who came in, very good surgeon, but he would not follow the plan of the country and wanted to do his own thing, and they made him leave because it disrupted their practice and it actually made things worse for that particular environment. So I think your issue about cultural humility and competence is across the board. I think it takes a long time. And I would say any of us who have done this, you know, a lot of what I do is I listen more than I talk, except for the training, of course, which they asked me to do. But I listen. I ask questions. I try to get a sense. And I'm not sure you can ever be fully competent when you go to a new place you have not been before, because you have no idea what's going to happen when you get there. I've had situations where the politics have changed in a situation, so what you came in thinking and the people you were going to be working with was different, and they had different ideas. And so that's why I think the skills that you actually need for this is recognizing that we really don't know a lot. Recognizing that we all have to have humility and be humble in what we can and cannot or may be able to accomplish. Recognizing that these countries and these areas have their own practices and their own culture, and we're not that culture. We will never be the same, and we have to recognize that and be able to work with that.
Can I say something briefly before, because I think I know what you're going to say? So I just wanted to clarify that when I am using the term, or when I use the term, you know, please don't come and help me, right? It was really part one of a twofer in which I thought Sue might talk a little bit about how we would turned people toward the concept of learning objectives, and can we really emphasize your curiosity in the process and what you're going to be learning, as opposed to the more active verbs of wanting to help, fix, do, treat, etc. And it's not to say that it isn't helpful, but it's just a way in my mind that I have of emphasizing exactly what you're talking about, that humility and that desire to be curious and to learn in the world as being the foundation for this more sensitive, open, listening perspective as we go ahead and do the active things we do.
Sure. I'm going to try to combine a little bit of what you said and what Carrie said in the context of what Sari and I did together. You know, what struck me about what you said is how much time it really takes to really adequately prepare, supervise, and debrief somebody for 3 or 4 weeks. It's an incredible investment. Even with our structured, we developed this structured approach. I would say probably typically 4 to 6 hours with a learner before they went, and then come back. When they went with Sari, they had they were with her all the time.
Living in my house.
Living in her house.
So like a month.
Yeah.
Living.
You know, right there. You know, when they get diarrhea, she knows about it. At Texas Children's, when the fellows go abroad, it's a global health track of a pediatric emergency medicine fellowship. They check in bi-weekly with. They have to write a little reflections piece, and they actually have some time talking with whoever their mentor is back in Houston. These are people who have committed to do 4 years of fellowship after 3 years of residency to do global health. These aren't the people you're talking about. The people you're talking about may never go abroad again. Because if you look at the data from medical students who do these experiences, the majority of them don't. Which doesn't mean to say they shouldn't go, but I feel very strongly that part of their preparation and their screening needs to be the understanding that this is a one-off for them. We're only going to get them so far in terms of they're never going to understand the way you do or you do. But we certainly in the preparation, who's paying for that? I don't know, not my medical school. You know, it's my time, you know, really basically. You know, what are the realistic expectations? It'll probably follow a typical curve of people who are excellent, people who do fine, and people like, I wish I never sent them. But I remember this one guy, he was a medical student at NYU, and I was supervising him in his capstone project for his MPH, and it was going to be, because one of the things we did, you know, they would come and say, I want a research project. The medical school would require them to have a research project, and I'm like, are you out of your mind? Yeah, Harry Carey. And what we finally did that made it at least doable was we said, these are the projects that are available to you. Similar to the residents we sent to Malawi to do the pain assessment. You want to go and do a project, here's what you're going to do. If it's not good enough for you, stay home. So that helped a lot. But Nick was going to do this triage project with Sari, and he was going to do sort of how the nurses felt about it. And one of the things he wanted to do was go and do qualitative interviews with the nurses. And I mean, we're kind of like, and finally I said, you know, Nick, your interpersonal skills here in the United States are not the best. How are you going to do in Ghana? Where it's that, and he goes, oh wow, you know, Dr. Tori, you're right. And what made me really sort of throw my hat in with this guy, who is now a global health resident in Texas and who is going to do a fellowship in PAM, is that he really sat back. It was a good test. He said, oh, you know, you're right. We're going to do it a different way. And we actually, the plan was to use Ghanaian medical students to do it. But so yeah, it's a huge investment. And I think we have to feel like just intrinsically it's an important thing to do and recognize we're only going to get it so far.
And, you know, kind of follow up very briefly, did any of you expose the prospective trainees with those who already did go in the past? Yeah. Who have like a focus session, sharing their experience within the group?
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah, certainly the stuff that we did at NYU, I mean, there was a practical imperative for that, right, is that it just takes so much time. So we would do a little peer mentorship, right, and you can't come unless you've talked to these 5 people who were there within the last 3 years, and we actually were able to kind of delegate a lot of the, you know, some of the logistics and so forth to those people so that they could take them through the process and we didn't have to.
We have an extra mic.
Okay. So you kind of started touching on research and this imperative that people, that learners have, and researchers and people working in academic medicine have to do research when they go in the global space. And I'd be interested to hear how you guys have been negotiating that in terms of informed consent and IRB, and what your experiences, challenges, solutions have been about that.
Well, actually, one of the nice things that has happened recently, at least with emergency medicine, is they've changed some of the requirements a little bit so that scholarly activity doesn't necessarily translate into research. So I can actually feel more comfortable sending somebody to do a project that doesn't necessarily result in a peer-reviewed, IRB-approved paper, right? Quality improvement or evaluation of programs doesn't quite fall under the same level of research. So in the past, where we always had to have, this mandate from the funder or the provider or the school or whatever that they have to have this research project, I can now spin this a bit differently. But still requires a lot of the same oversight of making sure that we minimize exploitation, you know, that you brought up in your lecture, and making sure that what we're doing and assessing and collecting is appropriate for the end result, and making sure that we're getting to an objective closure for the program. So that's helped, actually. And so I try to avoid research when I can, because it doesn't always facilitate the clinical piece of it and distracts often from getting those things done.
So when we first started, we had the elective, the 1 week, most people one-off kind of type experience, except for our senior leadership. We did ask that they do some type of project, and we learned that it was a disaster. Because the people that were going had never been before, so they had no concept or clue of what was an appropriate project, and would come to us, and we'd have to then sort of start from square one, or somehow they'd slip through the cracks and end up in one of the communities. We partner with a survey that was completely ridiculous. So we have now changed our approach from that to that the learner's writing a reflective piece, a narrative type something, which we find much more helpful and beneficial. It helps them for the people that, as you know, to reflect back, to gain more from the experience and realize how much they didn't know before they started, etc. With our global health track residents, it spans the 3 years that they are in residency, and it is an expectation for them that they do a research project. It's something that they don't even begin to pick until after they've been at least on one trip, to have a glimpse of what's going on down there. And our other firm stance is that we're not doing research for the sake of doing research. We will not do a project so that you can publish something. The project that you come up with needs to be something that will hopefully provide benefit to the community that we are partnering with, and provide useful information. What else do we want to talk about? Informed consent, thank you. That was the other thing that's been very interesting navigating this. It's been a new experience for myself. I sort of think back initially, beginning, just like when you buy a car, like you have to go through, sign all these papers and do all these things, and how much do you understand? And it's in my own native language, and just sort of using that as like try to gain a little perspective. When we do get IRB approval for what we do, we do not we do not have an academic institution which we partner with. So we've gone the route of using approval from the local community leader before, and bring that back to our home institution in order to obtain IRB approval, or to apply for IRB approval rather. And then when it gets to the realm of informed consent, we have the Rush, 25 million page informed consent that we type up in the native language. And then when we go to do the study, we offer the patient several different options of how to try to obtain consent from them. They are given the consent form to read. However, significant portion of the patients there are not literate, so reading is not an option. We give it to them. We bring down a tablet with the consent form read in said language, so they can sit and watch the video if they prefer, or we can have one of the native local people that we work with, who also serves as an interpreter, read it to them and go over it with them. But then with the option of asking questions about it afterwards, to try to provide a range of modalities in which the patient can feel comfortable, make sure they understand what's going on, and that we're for sure not pulling a fast one, or there's any room to think that we're pulling a fast one, and that we're not treating them with the exact same level of respect as we would treat anybody here. Is there anything else you wanted to know?
Can I say something about
Sure.
IRBs and research? The IRB and research question is a particularly thorny one. And I think, on both sides, I've had real challenges getting the IRB here, and particularly it was at Baylor, understanding what it really means to do a project in Malawi. They wanted to change the consent form that was already in Chichewa to something that was like the Baylor form. And then working in countries that don't have IRBs, or an IRB that's the country IRB. In Malawi, it's a country IRB, so our project has to go through that. It's very, very complicated. And so I really try to stay away. I try really hard not to get involved in that stuff. If that's why I like the idea of them working with a project that's already there. I talk a lot about, you're getting pilot data that doesn't require informed consent and will be the basis for a research project. But and then there's a whole problem with data transfer. Many places we're having a lot of issues in Uganda with the Uganda Cancer Institute, and for thorny political reasons is really stalling our data transfer agreements. So we can't get information about patients that are being cared for by the team in Uganda, can't come to Houston. So we just have to work with all of that. So they're really, really complicated. And when you stop and think about why, we've been going and experimenting on people there for a long time. So I mean, good on them that that there's some rigor kind of coming through on that. So this is a real, and I'm really glad to see people moving away from. I mean, what is a medical student doing an IRB related research project for anyway? So yeah, that's a particularly complex issue and needs to be thought through carefully.
I just want to add one comment. So first of all, I am not a researcher. However, having seen research done in other places and also looking at what has to be done to get things done, for anyone who's ever worked in other countries, if you have seen the amount of forms that have to be filled out with everything dotted, crossed, filled in, it's similar to our reaction to our electronic health records, where's the time for the patient? I'm spending so much time that I have to fill in all of this to meet all the criteria for whatever study it is that I'm doing, or even just a regular project, that we don't actually always take that into consideration, I think, when projects are evaluated. And you really have to look at what is the strain and the burden on these already overworked healthcare workers in these other settings by what we think we have to actually have really good data and research. And that needs to also be part of the pre-work that is done, is really thinking about it very strategically, logistically, and what can be done, and where we can actually shorten and improve to really just what's actually necessary.
Just to kind of play off of that a little bit, what we found when we were writing our pre-departure curriculum for residents who were going abroad at Mount Sinai, and they had a rather robust global health track, very similar to Rush, where multiple residents entered at the beginning of their residency, had a well-structured multidisciplinary program that they followed through in a track. And we realized that they were actually spending the most part of their pre-departure learning submitting IRB forms, right? And so 80% of what they were doing was just getting all these forms done. And we actually, we found an ally on the IRB. And so we actually standardized all of the global health submissions so that the IRB on the other side, rather than submitting it to some phantom panel that wanted all of these changes made, we had somebody already who said, here's how you should write it in a way that this will pass. And that actually was incredibly helpful later on, because that then helped standardize not just international experience IRB projects, but medical education projects in general, which were always looked at a little bit differently and never happened because of the onerous oversight that was going on.
I just, you mentioned using a kind of quality improvement, sort of operational research as one way to do this and have substantive projects that do have value and for the institutions or communities, but are not maybe as rigorous and as clearly designed toward the production of generalizable knowledge, and thereby might get us outside of some of that work. And I know that's something that I have also done in trying to figure out, well, how do I continue to do these projects and help train people from the US that want to come, and let there be some synergy between our needs as a department, their needs as learners, and my need to not be so time intensive with how I'm doing both. So it did seem very efficient, but one of the things that has been a very important part of my experience, and that I would caution everyone, is depending on the part of the world that you're in, and certainly if you're doing anything in Africa, whether they told you this or not, oh, by the way, the IRBs are not functioning in many countries. Certainly in Ghana, they are not functioning the way, in 100% the way they are functioning here. They're also being used by institutions to try to screen a little bit, how is my reputation? I guess that's true also, in the United States, right? And why you have to have institutional IRB approval for where you're at is so that they can also be screening the interests of the institution. Is this going to be politically putting us in an awkward position? How does this relate to our ownership of our own data and our own image, and how that's put out in the world? And of course, operational data is very, very sensitive in that regard, because it does relate to quality and it does relate to the real services that they're providing. And so in fact, the studies that would be exempt here, right, on that basis, are actually, there's more of an imperative to get ethical review, and part of that is the history of the IRB and how that came to be in certain countries. But in West Africa, and in the British model, so I think this is probably true in other countries, I just don't know, I'm ignorant. Initially there were ethical and scientific review committees, right, in many institutions. It's not the same thing as an IRB, but that is where their background and orientation toward the concept of reviewing work to make sure that it's an appropriate use of time and resources and politically okay kind of came from. So I think it's just important to be a little bit sensitive to the idea that things that are exempt in the United States and how we think about that process and the value is very different in other places. We can get into trouble with that.
Yeah, a quick question about, I think it's working, right? Yeah. Quick question about quality, because I think quality projects don't require as many hoops, and I think it's probably the best way in the long run to encourage sustainability, which is one thing that I don't know if that has been on the forefront of even some of the research, long-term research programs that go on there, because they're funded by, say, external agency. They're done by external personnel with some involvement of local scientists. And then the data is not co-owned, it's owned by, the external entity. So I think that in and of itself is, I believe, not a good intent. So whether it's meant or not, it comes across as not optimal. And I think introducing quality projects that can be done, not necessarily involving patients, but processes. is what's going to get the sustainability there, and it's also going to get scholarly activity out of this.
So,
One of the biggest problems which I think we are doing, we discuss a lot on these issues, but there are immense examples which we don't derive our inspiration from, like NIH or the biggest funding agencies have already established systems in place when they did something called as HPTN. So back in 1999 or 2000, when it all started with HIV, Bob Boringer and I don't remember the name of the dean at Yale, but they set the processes in place for international IRBs, Stan Verman, and they set the processes in place for international research when the first ever NIH investment in HPTN went in. So HPTN means HIV Prevention Trials Network. And HPTN became one of the biggest examples of whatever we speak about. So it was a multi-folk trial in which data was collected at various levels in HPTN because it was a cohort over years. So they were following these patients across the world, be it Africa, be it, so it was called HPTN, and Hopkins had that grant at that time. And that HPTN gave us an example of how really we work on these IRB funded projects. So really speaking, when we talk of all these layers, we are talking only if you have the funding. So are we saying that if you don't have the funding, for example, I'm talking about sonography, that's the next big thing in medicine, the visual stethoscope. And every specialty is embracing that in a very big way, because it may not matter to us, because everything in the United States is all about money, 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 money. So what would you do with that ultrasound? Can I bill? Can I bill? If you can bill, you're interested. If you can't bill, let it go to hell. So what happens is, that's not what the world thinks. For the world, ultrasound is a boon. For them, it's the visual stethoscope. They don't have CAT scans. They want to learn. They want to work in the community. So WHO this year announced that ultrasound will be one of their biggest initiatives in the developing world. And one of our leaders is the chairman of the committee. And he learned ultrasound from SUNY Downstate. So what I'm trying to get here is that funded research has its own layers, has its own problems, has its own bureaucracy to stick to. But we should also find an alternative as to what about non-funded research. People who want to build their career and apply for a big grant, but they need to show immense experience in working with that partner in order to get small research out.
Right, but that's where the autonomy piece, you have to
find a way out, that's what I'm saying.
But
no, but you have to do it for the autonomy piece to make it ethical. So
right.
I guess that was my point, is that just because we're going small, right, and operational and non-funded and you know, going into areas where we would normally get exemption, I think we have to be sensitive when we're doing international medicine that the onus is on us to actually go the extra mile and do much more than we would do in the United States because of the autonomy piece. And we have to be able to let people have some control over their image and how their data is collected, protected, and shared.
But also,
is it for intervention? The key is if you're intervening.
All of it. I think all of it.
I think the key thing is, so first of all, and I agree, I think ultrasound may be a big boon, just like cell phones actually were for a lot of the healthcare issues. So technology matters. But I think the goals in terms of the ethical dilemmas is you still need to get back to the basic principles of ethics. Regardless of what you're doing, whether it is paid research, unpaid research, quality improvement, or simply just going on an elective, whatever you want to call it, you still have to look at the beneficence. Are you doing something that is of benefit to the people or the community or the system in which you are working? What harm could you be doing? Is this equal distributive justice? And then the autonomy piece that was mentioned. So every country, every parts of countries are completely different. So whether you have worked in, and I've worked in at least 6 or 7 different African countries, completely different. So whatever I thought with one country, I started afresh when I went to a new place because I had to first understand their system as best I could, which was not a lot, before I would start saying, well, here's the QI. The other thing I would say from a training standpoint, for those who want to do international work, even for quality improvement, you have to actually make sure that your trainees and your attendings actually know what that means, because most of them have never been trained. Now, my organization, Virginia Mason, does a ton of quality improvement. We have system-based practice months for our residents to learn it in our own institution, so they can get expertise in that before we actually bring it to another country. If we don't know what we're doing, then it's like teaching bad medicine. And we don't want to do that.
One thing about, if I may, kind of echoing all of that, our part 2 of the consensus statement last year clearly states that we want to recognize work, time, publications, other things as equivalent in proportion to other things to funding. So our organization does not consider having funding as something special. You can get $1 million grant, or you can write 50 manuscripts. They're equivalent.
I just want to come back to non-malfeasance, and I think that this is, it's not just what I see when I sit here in Houston and say, oh, this is going to hurt people, or it's not. It's what the unintended consequences, the downstream issues that we cannot even predict because we don't know that environment well. So, and I want to come back to something, I think people heard what you said about, when you're working in a Ministry of Health or an organization, a medical school or a public hospital, and basically your quality improvement project is totally well intended, but it shines a glaring spotlight on a huge deficiency in their system that is going to light up like a political bonfire, and it's going to be on the front page of the newspaper. And even if you are going and doing something, there was a horrible situation in Uganda where some neurosurgeons went and did some stuff. They probably did fine. They probably did a really great job, but there were some bad outcomes, and it just was all over the paper in Uganda like they screwed it up. So there, you have to be aware of, whether you agree or not with this country being embarrassed about or not willing to look at their dirty laundry. You can't just go in there and empty out the basket. It's going to cause way, way, way more harm. That's the non-malfeasance part.
Right. And one more thing. Other countries, like in India, what happened is ICMR, which is the NIH, has made it mandatory that anybody who tries to do research in the country with international collaboration needs a sign-off from New Delhi. Now, that is one big thing which they are put in. So you may have encountered that in other countries too.
Yeah, well, certainly in Ghana, to get IRB approval at our institution, you have to have a local partner, first of all. So you cannot come in, period. They will not pass it, right? There is no such thing as exempt. That's not a category. We don't do that. Everything gets reviewed, right? So, there are particularities there, and then they actually do have autonomy to approve. They don't have to send it above to Ministry of Health. But, and each IRB in the country, there are many now that are institutionally based, and then Ghana Health Services and so forth, they all have that autonomy without a central clearing. But, I think just to kind of come back to this idea of the non-malfeasance part, to really just have a lot of humility about what some of those consequences are, and that they're not just political, they're also financial, right? And there's kind of big stuff at stake. And so you do have to be really, really careful about what you look at, and wanting to kind of meet people where they're at. Right? Recognizing that quality improvement, right, it's supposed to be this kind of cyclical, small pieces, small pieces, small pieces. Let's break down big problems and attack them one by one. Let's not try to shove people and humiliate them and push them beyond what they can handle at that point with regard to the politics and the finances and the prioritization, and kind of engage people in taking ownership and becoming empowered stakeholders in the process of improving healthcare along multiple dimensions that include acceptability and include the patient's perspective, hopefully, and the community's perspective about what they want to see, from their institutions. So, it's a very sensitive and potentially fraught with challenges area, and one that if not done well and done collaboratively can have great consequences. And I think in my experience, one of the things I brought up at the table out when we were doing breakfast and talking about this stuff is like, it is also an ethical challenge that I face on a daily basis to really try to understand, well then who speaks for the people, right? And as a doctor, as a clinician specifically, I was trained to believe that I was also always ever a patient advocate, right? And that, by virtue of training here at Downstate in a public teaching hospital, I got to understand really really early on, right, that hospital administration, and city administration and, government and so forth, not always the best patient advocates, often need a little bit of help with that, and that doctors on the front lines, nurses on the front lines, clinical staff who are engaged with patients and building that collaborative relationship at the bedside might be in a great position to help bring that fight up. And I brought that perspective with me to Ghana, and I think we all do need to be sensitive when we are working with institutions and ministries that having a local partner who's a peer, right, also a clinician, can be really, really important to help guide our understanding of what's going to be too much and too hot to handle, right? And what might be a fight that we can get through, and how do we negotiate that, because you certainly don't want to leave them with a big old political mess that they don't have the support to negotiate successfully. So there's that's my plug.
Be careful. Thank you. So I think since we're kind of heading towards the end of our time slot, I would like to sort of finish with a few minutes to discuss, but before that, have you all comment on, through your medical careers and your international work, what are some of the shifts that you've seen in the past, and what do you think that the next steps should be, will be, and how can we well prepare for that?
Having gone through the process and made lots of mistakes, and I think that that's a theme that we've all brought up, is that this process takes years, right? And some people drop off after one or two experiences because they become disillusioned because the resources weren't there to mentor them, those that had potential to make this into a career. And I've stumbled myself, and I feel like I'm actually in a stumbling phase right now, because I'm trying to figure out, how do I re-engage in what I thought I wanted to do 10 years ago. So what I think I've realized is I've come full circle on the staggered shorter term experiences. At first, when I first started doing this work, I looked at some of the shorter term things and said, well, that's not right because it's not sustainable and it's more for me rather than them, and I realize I'm not helping as much as I thought I would. It was better for my own personal growth. Whereas at that time I thought what I need to be doing is large-scale public health initiatives that help lots of people, right? And that also didn't really make sense to me at the time. I've come full circle on this, that my long-term career and fulfillment personally may only allow for those shorter periods of times. But so how can I make those experiences as beneficial as I can? And finding partnerships that are already well-structured and well-resourced is how I find that my impact on the ground is the least detrimental, right? So that term mission trip has become actually less venomous to me than it had been in the past, because I realize there is a role for that if I can find a way to engage and fix individual patients one at a time, if that gets them back into their community and back into their workforce. It's how I take care of patients in the emergency department, one at a time, and some days I only help one patient, right, in that whole time. So I've actually re-embraced the idea of what that there is not really a right way in terms of duration of time spent abroad, but what that impact actually brings and how resourced is it when I'm actually part of it. That's what I've realized in thinking about this panel lately.
I'm not sure how much I feel like I can comment on how like trends have changed or anything like that. I think I just, from an experiential standpoint, recognize the importance of, although what we offer right now is just 2 separate locations, and that people may look upon that and feel that outsiders looking in rather, or learners looking in, that we more limited the value of the fact that we have these now long-standing relationships that we have worked very hard to build trust and to build continuity, and all along the same time using that sustainability, but also to help the community that we're working with grow. The community we work with in the rural part of the Dominican Republic is actually about to graduate and be by themselves. That it's taken us much longer than our naive selves thought when we started out to get them to this point, but they now have worked and secured funding and sustainability for their clinic, and that we have helped provide education and guidance and support, and now they're ready to fly and function on their own with us as a backup and a resource if need be to re-engage. But the value and the importance of that, and that watching the community grow and continuing to highlight and reinforce, they come to us with their EKG from the Dominican cardiologist and want our opinion, and no, the Dominican cardiologist got it right. Yay, and encouraging to feed back into the system, and that you don't need the Americans here to that no, keep going back to the providers that are here for you, and just the significance and importance of that, and how the cases that we see in the clinic have changed the longer we're there, and there's no longer this, when we first get into a community, this urgency of wanting patients come, and you can tell they're reporting symptoms to you, because we're in a clinic, not in a hospital setting, because they want to make sure they have that ibuprofen for when their head really hurts, even though it doesn't hurt right now. But that as time goes on, the trust that we're here, we're coming back, we're helping your community, we're partnering with your community to help them grow, and that's changed over time to really an increase in understanding of their own health and the importance of it.
So I guess I probably, also, I have enough gray hair but not enough time in the water to really comment longitudinally, I don't think. But I think for me personally right now, and I don't know if it's because in Ghana, we had an election around the same cycle as in the U.S. and had a change in the power structure in the country. And so I think everybody has been very focused there where I'm living on politics, because it's all changing and there's a lot of stuff going on. And clearly, as I look back to the U.S., which is, I am a U.S. citizen, and this is where I was born, and I obviously have a lot of friends and family here, and I see, again, big political shifts, right? So maybe that's just where I'm at right now, or where we're at globally, and I'm trying to fit in. But I really am thinking about my work a lot in terms of political advocacy and what that means to be a clinician at the bedside on a larger political scale, and kind of, well, what are we involved in as we do this work? Which is very much a public service, and I tend to think of it in terms of social justice, and to think of my work as being related to this question of, well, is healthcare a human right? And if it is a human right, then how much healthcare do we have a right to, and who decides that, right? Is it the Ministry of Health? Is it central administration? Is it me as a clinician at the bedside, right? I get these patients who come in renal failure all the time, and they're going to die, and do we dialyze them? Do we not dialyze them? Well, how are we going to sort that out? And right now it's a very chaotic and confusing space. And so
And that's across board, every condition that we're trying to manage. So yeah, how much health care do they get? Who decides? And then who pays for it? These are big pressing questions. And I think when I look at the politics of what's happening here in the United States and some of the big threats to health care that have come up in the news, I think, you know, I did spend a lot of time growing up in France. I do believe the statement, you know, plus ça change, plus c'est la même chose, meaning the more things change, the more they're the same. I don't know that I believe we're moving into, you know, a new era, but there is some concept of progress and of cycles and of movement and change in society, and to be really engaged in that process is wonderful. We are under threat, and I think, you know, global health is going to be an arena where we start to sort out those questions and how it relates to equity and distributive justice globally, which is effectively, you know, how we're living in all sectors these days. So I think it's kind of a neat space and a neat expression of what we do and how I think about it.
So I'm not sure I'm going to add how we've changed in terms of where we've been and where we're going. I think the awareness and the ability to get information and transmit information has expanded globally. So I think that has good intentions and bad intentions, as many of the things that we do. I think the awareness of ethical paradigms and dilemmas for doing international medicine or global health, because those are actually slightly different things, is a good start. It's not nearly advanced enough. I also think that, again, as a residency person in a residency training, is we should not make it an expectation for medical schools or medical students that they have to actually go overseas. And I think that what I have seen is that there seems to be this checkbox, you know, for every, okay, did the international thing. I think we need to blow that up and say, no. What we need for clinicians to move forward, if you even want to do international medicine, is you need to have these skills. We don't care if you've gone overseas. You need to have skills in cultural competency. You need to have skills in communication. You need to have skills in, you know, working on system-based improvement and what that means. You need skills in ethics and being able to determine that. Maybe you need some advocacy skills to know how to do that. I think what I would like to have moving forward is, again, more of these kinds of dialogues, working with others in the community. There, I was mentioning at the table that there's this thing called Charity Navigator for anybody who wants to give a donation, and they kind of rank different charities by, you know, how well they do it, how much money actually goes to where it's supposed to go, which is the people they are trying to help. It would be great if we actually had a similar thing for organizations, institutions, medical mission type things, that to have that kind of same ranking with some of our ethical paradigms in place, so that anybody who wants to work with an organization or an institution and do something internationally actually can have a place they go, and we can know, okay, the ones that have, you know, less than 4 stars, those are the ones that should be out of business, quite honestly, because they may be doing more harm than benefit. Even though their intentions may be good, they may not actually be moving things forward or sustainable. So that's what I would like to see moving forward.
Okay. Well, just to go back a little bit to what I learned in preparing for the talk I gave at the beginning, is that there really has been tremendous progress on the education front and really defining what international health means for learners and what's really important to have ethically based programs. And it's impressive to me, and this isn't the first time I've looked at this literature, but it's impressive to me to see how many of these studies are 2017, 2016, 2018. So people are talking about it more and more. As I pointed out at the end of my talk, the deficiency is that we don't see enough of our local partners represented in this, among this literature. So it means that really for us, if we continue to work on that, we really have to focus really seriously on transformative bidirectionality. For me personally, this is what I tell every person who goes abroad. You will get more out of it than you will give, and that continues to be the theme in my life. My life is enriched by the people I've met in the countries where I've traveled, by the programs that I've worked with, by the learners that I've been involved with, and that's why I do it. Am I making an impact? I don't know. I think the impact I make is I'm the squeaky wheel in my well-funded organization to say, that's really not the right way to do that. Are you kidding me? You're sending a college student to do an elective in Uganda? Are you out of your mind? Who's going to babysit that person for those 3 weeks? And so that's my contribution. I think I've had a blast looking at, some education alternatives that we use here and seeing how we can mold them and fit them to, we're using this rapid cycle deliberative practice thing now. I'm trying to, it's so much fun, figure out how to use that type of simulation that they could really probably do to teach assessment of acutely ill children instead of like high quality CPR, because who's going to teach high quality CPR to kids in Malawi? It's not going to. So for me, that's it. I mean, I see a lot of progress, and I'm happy to say that about how we're thinking about how we educate people. And as long as I can still physically go, it's going to enrich my life. It's a blast. I'm going to keep doing it.
So I want to thank all of you for making the efforts to come here to discuss this, and all of you who are here. I know we're about time for the next session, but anyone who wants to hang around and talk for a couple extra minutes, I think we have the room for a few more minutes. Our certificates.
Get a photo of you guys. You did a fantastic job. We hope that we'll be able to encourage you to continue these conversations with the king by becoming members. Consider it strongly. We're having a discount. Go ahead and get the discount. To grab yours. I think it's because they did the last session and yours was the first half, so I'm going to bring it.
That's right.
Yeah, let's take a picture. And also that we have our ethics committee. You guys, I think they had the meeting yesterday morning, so I think most of you weren't here, but this is basically the ethics committee, so you guys really should get involved. Let me get a photo. Yeah.
Do we need to switch in?
No, I don't mind getting a little closer to you.
All right. Great. Okay. Come closer. All right. That's much better. All right. 1, 2, 3. Very nice.
The head of our ethics committee.
Yeah, so he's like...
He was very excited. It was great. No, our kitty is just grown.
Now you have a kitty.
It's triple in size.
You know, Rana just got back from Lebanon. You see her stuff. They went to refugee camp, the Syrian refugee camp.
I spent some time introduce myself at the beginning.
Okay.
Pleasure. Yeah, my pleasure. Thank you for being here. So
Thank you for your question.
Thank you. Well, thank you for your wisdom. It's really enlightening. One thing that I think the next logical step of this initiative would be to establish some kind of council to guide programs to ensure that there's some level of standardization, which could then potentially lead to almost like a code share system between institutions. So let's say someone from our institution would like to go to Uganda, and programs that participate are in that code share system. We would make that possible through some kind of legal arrangement. Our residents go to Cameroon. Maybe it would be of interest for someone else to go to Cameroon. And then we create coordination system and also standardization and resource sharing system for different institutions. Another part of that would be activity government, because we want to track quantitatively how much time and effort actually goes into it, so that we can have sources of funding at the end of the day that are distributed among members that would offset our views. Let's make it, it's not about grants, it's not about, it's about people doing clinical work and then